Live. Welcome to the fourth episode of Adored Tech. I'm Donny. With me is my co-host Alex, as always. Alex, how you doing?
Pretty good.
And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Tech Potato himself, Dr. Ian Cutress.
Hi, Jim. How's it going?
All right, guys. Going.
Please don't get the chat started on that. I've had enough nightmares as it is. I've had you have no idea how many like belligerent and borderline threatening comments mostly Alex has received.
I've gotten letters to my house. I don't even know how they found my address.
Sorry about that. I'll try and scale it back later.
Yeah.
No, thanks guys for inviting me on. Much appreciated.
Thanks for coming on, man. It's really really cool of you. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on some of the news of the week and some other topics that we have prepared for you. I think our first topic is going to be Hey, you listen. You signed off on everything. Whatever we go on from here is fair game. So what's your love life?
Fair. That's fair. That's fair. I should expect what's coming.
Exactly.
You're going to get the real dirt on a non-techno.
Before we get into the actual topics, I guess, how's everyone doing?
Yeah, it's Q1 sort of was meant to be sort of like a quiet time in the industry. And whenever there's a quiet time, there's never a quiet time, as usual. There's launches happening every week that we don't expect. Later this month, we've got Mobile World Congress and ISSCC. And then going into sort of like the late Q1 launches, everybody who said that there'll be stuff at the end of the quarter, that's going to come thick and fast, I think. We're all going to be talking about reviews and benchmarks and whether money means anything, which is a great segue into our first topic.
Right. Mm-hmm. I agree. So, wrong button. Sorry, guys. So, let's see here. Let me pull. Yeah. Kyle Bennet over at HardOCP is, I guess, kind of doing a live blog, or not a live blog. He's doing just a personal blog now at this point with HardOCP. And he recently had quite the controversial topic, which was that he believes GPU MSRP prices will be going away at some point in the future.
So for people who don't know, Kyle Bennet is one of the kind of OG written tech reviewer websites at HardOCP from the early 2000s, I think. He kind of stopped writing about 2016 and then joined Intel for like a year and a half. Then left, I believe, due to some family issues that he had to sort out. And since then, he's kind of been present, but not writing and not generating content, except for one-off posts like this. So it's important to put that into context if you don't know who he is. He's been around. He is very opinionated. I've met him a few times. He's great to talk to, and people agree to disagree on some of the stuff that he's written in the past. And this is another topic ripe for debate, I think.
Yeah.
So it seems like we got some super chats up here. Just before we dive into this topic, we have one from Quinn F that says, "Will wafers be eaten on the stream?"
Oh, do I have to? There we go.
And we have one here from Adam in Charge saying, "Where's Jim? These guys suck."
You wish.
Unfortunately, we don't know where Jim is. Did we lose you, Donnie?
Living at large.
I think we lost Donnie here. He seems to be frozen.
As the host, no worries. So you've read Kyle's post. What was the brief overview that you had of Kyle's post?
I mean, I think he made some points that me and Donnie have made on the stream before, which is the market's changing. Gen Z and like younger millennials are very much different from the Gen Xers and the older millennials. In sort of their purchasing decisions, they're less involved. They look at gaming computers less as something to tinker around with, and what's better, more bang for buck, and instead more like what looks cool or what is, like in some senses it's what's the best, or just this is like this isn't something that they really care about in tweaking and that sort of stuff. It's more like an appliance, which is something he said. How many people wonder what the chip is inside their VCR? They just want to know what the features are, is one thing he said.
Yeah, it's so there's always been that element of the market that have purchased based on emotion, based on aesthetics, and based on what their friend who knows what they're talking about suggests, or what their most influential celebrity in this industry suggests. I think Kyle's initial premise there was that the market is moving away from people who are steadfastly interested in how things run, how the sausage is made.
Yes.
Either that's on the level of put a PC together, or something a bit more fundamental like CPU microarchitecture. And in essence, in a market right now where prices are at a whim based on supply, shipping, shortages, the 3 S's, that it doesn't ultimately matter if somebody tries to go hard in, because they won't be able to buy what they find is the best. Let's just get something that plays Fortnite. Let's just get something that plays Dying Light. Let's just get something. Now, there's always been an element of a market element of that. One thing I think Kyle kind of missed in this is representing that market always existed. And I think what actually his core argument comes down to is that proportion is shifting away from the technical, more into the just let's get, if people aren't spending money on house deposits these days because they can't, they're buying PCs, but they're buying pre-builts, and the ultimate, sorry, just the ultimate end point of Kyle's post is that at the end of the day, this just means that MSRPs mean next to nothing, because the hardware isn't getting the hardcore analysis done by the industry, because people are just willing to take on merit what somebody else suggests or looks good. That's which I think is the extreme of what Kyle's saying, but it was right front and center, I think, in that article as well.
I think he took a more extreme opinion than what I personally think is going to happen, but he is right in a lot of the points that he makes, especially like the sort of influencer marketing is becoming really important. And like you said, this is what, say, Ninja uses. I'm going to buy that. This is what Shroud uses. I'm going to buy that. Instead of saying, I want to spend 6 hours or a weekend researching a part, they just say, well, Dr. Disrespect uses Asus motherboards and Asus graphics cards. I'm going to buy those.
Yeah, but like I say, this has happened for such a long time. I think it's most of the way to read Kyle's post is as if this is a new thing, and it just isn't. Though I think I was speaking, I can't remember on which Discord it was. It could have been mine, it could have been yours, it could have been Hardware Unboxed, I think. Just saying how when I speak to these companies, they're still really interested in in-depth reviews, right? The ones that go really deep into how stuff works, to try and capture the imagination. Kyle's argument is that there is a reduction in appetite for that, so people are more likely to go view edutainment or influencer TikTok style content. But I speak to these companies and they turn around and say, look, we're really invested in our reviewer program. The amount of samples we give out depends on how much we want to push, but we're still fundamental love the deep dive, the ones that tell the influential people in the industry how our stuff works. But the main concern is that the number of people who are able to do those deep dive reviews is smaller than it used to be, because it depends which way you look at it. In terms of raw numbers, we're seeing lots of media, OG media like Kyle leave the industry, and Kyle actually notes he left because he saw the tide turning in how content was coming across and where the marketing money was being spent. It's whether it's raw numbers are actually decreasing, or whether it's as a proportion of the tech media as a whole going all the way from entertainment to edutainment to education to something a bit more fundamental. The proportion of people doing hardcore reviews has gone really tiny. Companies still want them, but there's just fewer people willing to do them. But that's also another function of how media has changed. People not doing this as a career. I review products as a career. So I started with it being a hobby. I turned into freelance. I went full time. I now look at ways in which I can, bolster my income, because it's your job, right? You want to see where the growth is. And that just means it becomes a lot more of a corporate entity in building a base of reviews. Whereas nowadays, the people who kind of do in-depth reviews, really detailed, are doing one-offs. They're independents. They're doing it aside from their day job, and the kind of whole industry is mixed up in that way. And it's hard to really put your thumb down, because the minute it gets corporate, there's suddenly pressure on top that you need to do thinner content, you need to do more of it, you need to do all the SEO, or you need to do the thumbnail that goes right. It's all pushing down that front. It's a function of reduction of independent media. And that's because independent media is becoming less and less viable financially for people who have been in the industry 10, 15, 20 years. If you're independent media and you're getting by on 20, 30, 40,000 a year, if you're making that at 25 and you're still making that at 45, right? How are you providing for your family if you don't have a partner who is making 2-3x that? It's that sort of business, really.
What ends up happening with a lot of guys is they end up working for the other side in some way. They end up going on the other side of press because
they pay.
Look, if you're on a good year or making, say, 35 grand, maybe you make 25 on a bad year. Maybe your ceiling is like 45. ASUS offers you, or literally any other company offers you 80 a year, and you get to do most of the stuff you're already doing now. Maybe you send some emails out to press, and you work in sort of a more of a technical role of marketing, or you make and your ceiling is way higher. You could go and make 10, 15 times what you're making now.
And Antech's always had the policy of trying to hire engineers and teaching them to write, rather than finding journalists and teaching them about technology. The problem is you can earn 3 to 5x more as an engineer at one of these companies than you can being a journalist. So that's, and just to spin it back to Kyle's main comment that I think we wanted to touch upon. He's saying that because of the lack of in-depth content, because we're going to that sort of influencer, edutainment, instant, Ninja buys this, so I should buy it because I like Ninja, whatever narrative, that suddenly the prices of things don't matter. It just depends who hawks them.
Absolutely.
Essentially.
Also, I just want to point out that I didn't intentionally do the stream. Comcast was as wonderful as always, so I had a service outage. Luckily, it was solved rather quickly. But I wanted to touch on something that I think a lot of people that I see in the enthusiast community will be quick to blame outlets like Linus Tech Tips for shifting things in that direction, that more influencer, infotainment sort of direction. And I'm not accusing them of that myself. I'm just saying, it's out there in the zeitgeist. We all know it. What I find really fascinating is Linus is investing quite a bit of money, it seems, in doing and opening up an actual lab sort of facility where they do more in-depth, really engineering type testing that, you know, not many people have the money or the knowledge to do so. And so I find it interesting that he sees the sort of niche where companies are like, yeah, we're still happy to have in-depth reviews. The problem is who's doing them anymore.
Mhm.
And he's trying to tackle that, I think, head on as well.
I mean, I'll be honest. I think what Linus is doing is good. I mean, I've never been in a position where my employer has turned around and said, "Here's 10 grand. What do you need to improve your testing?" Right. The problem with lots of independent media is they've never been in that position, or at least those who don't own the websites they work for.
Mhm.
Linus is in a position where he can drop 6-7 figures on a new building. Though that being said, I think people are confused about exactly what he's doing there.
Mhm.
No, for example, a lot of people are putting thought into, oh, this just means he's going to be doing in-depth reviews, and there'll be a dedicated channel to that, or some of it will bleed onto the main channel. Whereas in my mind, I see him doing more corporate white papers for businesses.
This
the
is
ones
very
where-
reminiscent of what PC Per was doing with Shrout Research Group.
Mhm.
And Ryan eventually went to work for Intel because Intel offered him a lot more money. But Ryan didn't necessarily have the 6-7 figures to put into a lab that Linus does, right?
Yeah.
It's Linus's thing for the people who dislike him and dislike the way he's taken it, you know, whatever. He has brought a lot of people into, let's just find gadgets interesting. And if you look at it from that perspective, it's great. I mean, him and I have had, you know, joke beefs about what are the right units to use on memory, and it, through that interaction, it shows that he does have the desire to educate people in the best practices when it comes to, even if it's, you know, let's unroll a 600-foot optical USB cable, whatever. But he's realized that in order to grow his business, he needs to have multiple sources of income.
Mhm.
That's why we have Floatplane. This is why he now has his own dedicated merch business, and the lab will be another source of income, not only for him personally, but also for the business, to allow the business to grow. I know a number of YouTubers, big YouTubers out there, who are happy with where they are, with their viewer counts, with their income. They're not looking to grow. They're just looking to stay constant. Linus is always looking to grow.
Well,
And there are a few people who can manage that and succeed.
I think a lot of us as YouTubers look at it as a small sort of cottage independent business that they get up, they do their research, they make a video, and in order to really grow, you need a team of people, and that requires a whole
business.
And now you need to worry about how you're going to get those people fed, and it's a very different job.
If Linus does turn that lab into more detailed technical content, I still worry it won't be as technical as what we do on Anantech. It may be as technical as Steve does on Gamers Nexus, maybe even a bit more so. He says he's in the final stages of hiring an OG person in the industry to go head up that lab.
I almost for a second thought it might have been you, to be honest with you, or at least that he reached out.
It's about my I wouldn't say my money is on Kyle. I have a outside thought it might be Kyle, though I'm not entirely sure Kyle and Linus's personalities would gel.
Our comment section is really active today. We have another super chat, and it's Adam in Charge asks, he wonders what you're drinking. Is it coffee? If it is, then what's in it?
No, I'm just drinking some cold water. It keeps me awake. What I do want to see in the chat and in the comments after this goes live is who from Original Tech Media people think Linus is going to hire as the head of that lab.
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see.
Ever since you mentioned it, I've been so curious. Like,
he has tried to hire me a couple of times over the years. So,
which is why I thought maybe this was the final thing he can entice you with. It was like, well, you know, we're going to spend a lot of money on research equipment. You're like, well, like
Spend a lot of money on me, and we might be talking.
Well,
yeah. So
that goes
I
without
mean,
saying.
Going to wrap this up, because going back to what Kyle originally said, that because of all this GPU MSRPs, with all the stuff that's going on in the GPU market now, is there a point to graphics cards having a price? Will we get to a future where just graphics cards won't be listed as a price, and they'll be up to AIBs like Asus, like Gigabyte, like MSI, like EVGA, just to set their own price for the cards? It's weird, because we already deal with a couple of markets that don't have MSRPs, like AMD's mobile CPUs don't have MSRPs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Intel's do, but Intel's don't make sense, because sometimes you can buy laptops for cheaper than what they list the chip is available online. Technically, server CPUs have MSRPs, but the people who buy those in bulk aren't paying those prices by by like a factor 5. Intel's biggest chip costs $9,000, but you can bet your bottom dollar Google isn't paying more than $1,500 for it or something. So
I would say that the big difference is direct to consumer sales. Nobody's buying a laptop CPU on its own, so it doesn't matter what the price is in terms of a consumer-facing price you can market. As long as Intel is ensuring that they have the proper SKUs in the proper laptops at certain budgets, because they enforce those kind of standards, then it's going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of graphics cards, though, while the PC and DIY space is still a rather small sliver of the overall add-in board market, it still exists, and so. At least from a marketing perspective, I think MSRPs still serve a function. I think my opinion is they will continue to exist. Although I wouldn't be surprised if, like Kyle said, we do see more launches where they decide not to have an MSRP for whatever reason. I think right now, though, the market is just in a weird place. So companies are going to do what they're going to do.
Excuse me.
Personally, I'd rather, in right now, NVIDIA not have an MSRP than have one that is so optimistic that it's, non-existent, or it's not even close to the real street number, which is like, what we've seen with the RTX 3050, where there's very few product that ever hits store shelves at that number.
I see MSRP right now in that market more as a scaler.
Mm-hmm.
As a multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a product at 200, you have another one at 400, you have another one at 600, you have another one at 800. What's the retail price at the end of the day for those products? And it's just a multiplier out, and it just gives you another factor in positioning, perhaps more so than the actual name of the card. So I don't think MSRPs are going away for the consumer end products. I mean, technically, the enterprise GPUs do have MSRPs as well. They just don't promote them. It's like, I think I saw an A100 is like $30,000 now. Something.
Yeah, I mean,
the 80 gig version.
It's one of those things that if you need to know the price, you'll know it. You'll be told, what the quote is on the actual number that you need.
So we're getting some pretty active comments again, talking about MSRP, and there seems to be some arguments here. The first one we have here is another one from Adam in Charge. It's another super chat. It says, I think MSRP is an outdated and archaic concept. We're entering a post MSRP market, and things are worth what people will pay. I mean, in the current shortage that we're having now, it's absolutely the case of supply and demand, where people are, paying whatever whatever number they think is high enough, and as long as supply is as bad as it is, or demand is as insane as it is, it's going to continue this way. With mining being somewhat less profitable now, maybe that's less of a thing. And I mean, we don't know if Ethereum is going to pop again to say 3,500 in a month or two. Like, we really don't. So that's kind of the issue here. But I personally think that even if we removed the mining demand, it would take a while for prices to normalize. And I think we're going to see just a general price increase in graphics cards going forward. I hope not. I hope you can, in 2023, 2024, buy a $200 graphics card that's absolutely fantastic. But I don't know if it's going to stay that way, because I think AIBs and everybody in between in the market has seen that people are kind of willing to pay this. And if they continue to be willing to pay this, it might just stay this way, because nobody likes to make less money.
One thing I would add in is we're going through a period right now where not only is there high demand, but also the infrastructure around GPU delivery is really expensive.
Yes.
So we're not only talking manufacturing, we're talking packaging, we're talking shipping, we're talking all that jazz. So if, say, that part of the market, plus, power delivery on the board and some of the components on there, if they've gone up a factor 5 to 10x in cost, plus we're going through a high demand, even if we were in a low demand phase, graphics cards would still be more, what used to be $100 graphics card 5 years ago, we don't have the $100 equivalent, because that's just not economically feasible, even if you had the same cost per square millimeter die area. Because if your container shipping from China to the US, instead of being $600, is now $8,000, right? It just all adds up and adds up and adds up, and then delays, and it's hard. We can't really define what part of the market is a fixed cost increase versus a variable cost increase. And
to just button up that point a little bit, guys, it costs the same to ship a container of 3090s as it does a container of RTX 3050s. So why
would
you
can fit more 3050s because they're smaller?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely obviously those kind of logistics have always factored into product pricing, is the packaging size and the product size itself. But I mean, when you're spending so much more on shipping right now, and the floor has gone up as much as it is, it just makes sense to be shipping the most expensive thing you can most of the time, or at least more expensive, more high margin products, because
they're going to sell regardless.
Assuming you can make them at reasonable yield.
Mike Brazone added to that comment and said, as an economist, one of the things I do is called perfect price competition, where there is no such thing as a scalper, only price for applications demand. I mean, the scalpers exist because there is a demand that, exceeds whatever retail price is. It's not fun. I know nobody likes it, and I know a majority of our viewers are not people who are willing to drop insane amounts of money for a GPU, but those people are, and they're buying them. So there's nothing really that me or you or Donnie could do about this, Ian. And I think that's another thing that Kyle makes a really good point in his article, which is, we can only shout at the sky so often until we're just that Simpsons episode, old man yells at cloud. We can only shake our fist so often.
Well, when I deal with companies and there are issues, if it's technical, it's usually you have to be able to speak to the right person who knows the right person to fix something. When it's something more general like this, where market forces matter more than media response, then you're shouting to the sky until the cows come home and pigs fly and all that jazz. So
reviewers could go out and tell everybody not to buy any of these cards for these prices, but people are still going to do it.
Yeah.
And this is something Hardware Unboxed said a little while ago. Which is, and I think this was one of like Jim's sort of critiques that they took, personally, but I don't really think Jim intended it as a personal slight. But I think they made a good point here, which is, there's only so much you can do as a reviewer to yell at people and say, don't buy this, when it sells out instantly over and over again at launch day. You could say this is the worst thing ever. This is way overpriced. This is terrible. And yet there are none available on launch day. So what are we really doing? and usually it would be that we would affect the second shipment, the third shipment, the extra waves. But with demand that's insane, I mean, there's a reason why we're not getting sampled graphics cards from most outlets are not getting sampled graphics cards, or are getting sampled a very small amount of graphics cards at launches.
Companies look at which media outlets provide them the most coverage. Back before YouTube got really big, and I guess probably in the more sort of earlier 2000s, Sandy Bridge E launch, Intel sampled over 1,000 CPUs worldwide, and there were leaks everywhere. But everybody knew the performance; it was coming out. And then, as far as I understand it, they looked internally and said, "Well, 80% of the traffic are coming from the top 15 sites.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do a reduced sampling regime this time because it's less problems for our infrastructure." Now, Sandy Bridge E was obviously a big step up. They wanted to promote that from the hills. Ivy Bridge E was like a minor step up, so they didn't need to promote it as hard.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of press complained, and this goes to a bigger discussion that I've had swirling in my head a while about tier 0 versus tier 1 versus tier 2. And just because you're a member of the press doesn't mean you automatically have to get sampled.
Mm-hmm.
There are companies that give me the 2 fingers and tell me to sod off still. So it's how it is. And you have to, it's hard to work with PR sampling if you're not already experienced in working with PR sampling. If you're a new kid on the block, you feel slighted that why are these people getting review units and I'm not? Well, it's, do you have a multi-year relationship with the company? Do you have deliverables that can be communicated back and forth? Whether that's under sponsored content or just regular, review samples, and it all gets tied into that. And at the end of the day, anyway, I spoke to a company, big, top 3 that we all talk about, and they said they are committed to in-depth reviews. The problem is there's just fewer and fewer people doing in-depth reviews these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also an issue, like you said, of people who might be capable of doing these reviews feeling like the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. And yeah, an $800 processor is nice, but it takes 2 weeks of my life.
And the rest. Yep.
In terms of having experience talking to PR people, I can tell you when I just started out, I just used to mention the word exposure a lot in my emails to the PR people.
And synergy.
Not so much synergy.
What?
But I don't know.
You offering to be paid in exposure?
No, I was telling them we would love to provide exposure for your product to our audience and yada, yada, yada. And I don't know what it is, but when PR people hear the word exposure, their eyes light up. But trust me, it doesn't work that well anymore.
So the fun thing is that with my YouTube channel now, I'm at 60,000 subscribers. There are companies reaching out to me who don't know that I'm a senior editor for AnandTech, and are just taking we really think your content is really professional, blah blah blah. We want to sample you or whatever. To the point where I'm actually getting contacts from companies that I already work with from AnandTech, but a different person inside the team, and nobody's making the connection. And I have to, they are separate businesses. I wouldn't lie if spending 10 years in the industry did give me some clout on some level. But yeah, it's also a different attitude from that perspective as well.
So when do you get the sponsorship monies?
I've already got a couple of sponsorships. There are a couple of companies already reached out about sponsored videos. And that's I've kind of resigned myself to saying, if people want to do sponsored content, then let's find something that's interesting, which arguably is the Linus model, right? You're not going to do a video in collaboration with a company sponsored about their 600-foot optical USB cable, unless you're doing something fun about. And if that means hooking it over the house and whatever, it's
for you. Is it probably going to be more that fun side of things? Or are you looking to do something maybe more, in-depth and technical, but still a sponsored like showcase of the product?
It's so the one sponsored. We're going really off topic now. The one sponsored video I have done, I did 2 with Facebook's engineering group, which is kind of different to Facebook being the social media giant. It was an atomic clock on a PCIe card, and I got to speak to an engineer, and it was a really cool technology that I wouldn't have had that opportunity if it wasn't in that sort of environment. And yeah, they didn't even vet my final video in the end.
That's pretty interesting. It's crazy because I remember watching that video and I was really fascinated by it, and I completely forgot that was a sponsored thing. Like, I guess that goes to show how good the content is that it's just useful information regardless of whether or not you got paid for it. But I mean, obviously that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes a product showcase is just an ad.
Yeah, and then we come back to, well, is your favorite YouTube celebrity that you watch, are they hawking this because they actually enjoy it, or are they hawking it because somebody's paying to? But then, is your favorite film star really a perfume aficionado, or is he just being in that ad because Estee Lauder has paid him?
That's one of the interesting things is I've always heard people like in our spaces say stuff like, do these people really support it, and this is going to hurt your brand and your these if this company would do that, do you seriously recommend it? And it's like, well, when I would see Derek Jeter say that he drinks Dunkin' Donuts coffee, I didn't believe he drinks Dunkin' Donuts coffee.
Is that Britney Spears sponsored by Pepsi drinks Coke, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that they're being offered this money as a sponsorship thing, and it's what it is. Because I grew up listening to like local radio shows where they talk about Frank's Barbecue on the corner of 9th.
Yeah, it's an ad spot.
It's an ad.
Yeah. I guess for the consumer, though, the key difference there is that Britney Spears doesn't provide in-depth technical reviews of Pepsi versus Coke on a regular basis.
She could.
So,
it's to Jeff from Craft Computing and I came up with the idea, which now that I've thought about it for a couple of weeks is perhaps a bit stupid. But you know how racing drivers have overalls with all their sponsors on? Reviewers should sell 10 spots on a t-shirt for ad space. And yeah,
they're not paying us though.
No, I just like the shirt.
I mean, we did the one video.
These guys definitely aren't paying me.
Well,
I wore the Noctua hoodie the first live stream we did, and they didn't do anything for me. They just sent me the hoodie, and I was like, thanks for the hoodie.
That's you got to declare that on your income.
I got your check. Sorry.
So the chat is working really fast. People got really angry about the GPU conversation, but we have another super chat from Adam in Charge. He's really just throwing these out.
He really wants us to know how much he paid for that 3090.
He spent $3,500 for a 3090. It was worth it. I had a new GPU, and the seller fulfilled that need.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you've got standard business, right? If you've got a need that you can put a financial value to, that buying the new product will help accelerate that need. Well, it's a no-brainer. But
so I have a friend of mine who is pretty comfortable financially, and he overbuys everything. He said that he wanted a 3090, and he said the $1,500 price point is just not coming back, so he gave $2,300 for it. And at one point, he was saying that he was willing to give a scalper like $2,500, and he knew it was more than what the card's like MSRP was supposed to be, but it just wasn't worth it for him to wake up and try to go on the Newegg shuffle and get price alerts and whatever, because at some point,
how much is your time worth?
Yeah.
If you spend 10 hours trying to find your GPU and your time is worth, $50 an hour, you're costing yourself $500 to save $200 on a GPU. For reference, my machine is running a 1060 right now. I haven't bought a new GPU. That being said, so I've had a 1080 in for a while, and I actually had an issue where I had to take it out and put a 1060 in this week,
Mhm.
and I can feel the difference in Forza Horizon 4 between the two.
I would
Mhm.
hope so. That's
And it's
quite a bit.
looking back on it, I'm thinking, how much am I enjoying the game for the quality of the graphics versus how much I'm enjoying the game for the game?
Mhm.
Because I've always been a enjoy the game for the game sort of person, but now I'm kind of half thinking.
So
But
we have another one here, which is NBW Doughboy says that the 6500 XT is a prime example. The card is so
Shit.
it's sitting on the shelves. This should be happening for a lot of the cards. Well, the problem with the 6500 XT is if you have a 580, a 570, a 970, anything in those tier of cards, a 1060, there's not really a reason to buy this card, which I think is what most people who are looking to upgrade have at least that or better. I don't think there's a whole lot of people with 960s who are looking to buy a GPU, where this would be a significant upgrade.
Well, so I mean, pandemic has in general meant that some people have more free money, excess money to spend on these things. So, okay, I'm currently running a 1060. If I upgraded to a 6500 XT, would I necessarily see that much of a performance increase? A little bit, but also I get all the brand new features of that card. And if I'm in the state of having a hole burning in my pocket to go out and buy one because I haven't bought one in ages and I'm thinking, oh, I'll treat myself, then go out and buy one and that's it, and you'll be happy with your purchase. It's everybody's need is different, and I think a lot of the argument around that card is that everybody's focusing on the typical need.
Mm-hmm.
And some might argue that there is no such thing in this environment as a typical need. But that I would also argue against myself and saying that is a cop-out. Don't be such an idiot. There's got to be a better way to frame it than that.
Well,
I
mean, if you guys are familiar with salesmanship or marketing stuff, there's a certain point where everyone has a balking price, where they just get up and say, I'm not involved. I'm out. They get up and they fold their hand or whatever it is. And for a lot of people that are used to the old environment of what we've known for the past, say, 10 years, a lot of us are sitting here and saying this is insane. And look, personally, I would not give anywhere near as much money as a 3090 is. I would have not bought my 6800 XT if I didn't need something high-end to benchmark with. If I was not doing this, I would be probably sitting still with, I don't know, like a 1060 I bought after I sold whatever high-end card I had already. But for some people, they don't really have anything else to do, so this is affecting their balking price. Well, they can't go out. They can't do this. Their friends don't want to do this. Whatever your personal life experience is, you might just say your priorities have shifted. For somebody who says, screw this, I'm going to go fishing, totally valid for a lot of people. For some people, it's not. So I think that's kind of the thing. Doughboy says people are just tapping out and don't really care anymore. If they're going to continue to be this insane, buy a console and game for 5 years. I mean, that's what people did when the Xbox 360 came out for a lot of people. So I think it's not really a sort of us versus them thing. I think it's just looking at it from should I just be involved in PC gaming for the next couple of years? Should I just not care?
GPUs are just becoming a luxury.
Yeah.
Right. And if you just want run of the mill, let's do what we've usually done. That doesn't exist. It's only those who want to consider it a luxury. It's that thing about how pretty much all sneakers trainers can be made for less than $150, but some are sold for $1,000 because there's a demand for it. So this is that we're now in that sort of luxury environment, right? And yeah, it's if all I wanted to do was game, I'd get a console, I'd get a Switch. I've been watching quite a lot of Super Mario Maker on YouTube. So But yeah, no, okay, we've flogged this topic
Yeah,
for
I
45
think
minutes.
we
Let's
have.
go on to
Just-
the next one.
Chat has been so active on this. I'm sorry if I missed a lot of comments. I know that there's been a lot of them here. I just can't get to all of them. They're going too fast.
We will try to focus a little bit more on chat comments during the Q&A segment, but
Yeah,
obviously,
you guys
as-
are something else today. I mean, I guess we got the doctor in here. We're talking about GPU prices, so it got everybody.
So moving on to our next topic, during their earnings call, Lisa Su, speaking to, I guess, numerous people, was quoted as saying, as we ramp our current products and launch the next wave of Zen 4 CPUs and RDNA 3 CPUs, we also have made significant investments to secure the capacity needed to support our growth in 2022 and beyond. So that sort of reaffirms their prior commitments to saying that, I mean, I think they've said at CES Zen 4 was coming this year. I think that's the first time they've said publicly that RDNA 3 was definitely coming this year. I mean, there was some slides, but as we know, marketing slides kind of are ambiguous in terms of actual launch dates for products.
The investor relations slides are usually pretty good.
Mhm.
But
yeah.
Yeah, they already said Zen 4 was going to be second half of the year. Depends whether you think that's going to be early second half or late second half. So we're looking anywhere from sort of July through to December. They could go for another 7.7 launch. They did that with Zen 2.
Mhm.
Yeah, people were arguing if this should be a 5.5 launch because it's 5 nanometer. But it's not Zen 5, so sorry. Whereas GPUs, them being out by the end of the year, that's obviously interesting.
Given the current state of things, them being so confident in an earnings call, in reporting that they plan to launch by the end of the year, that I mean would suggest that they think that by then supply will be good and maybe some more stabilization in the market. Obviously, we don't know. There's no way to predict those things, but at least in their projections of things, they're hoping that they'll be able to actually meet demand with the new products.
Yeah, the demand question is a bit wacky. I'm not entirely sure I believe AMD on that because so many elements of the supply chain are still up and down. They're very hard to predict. So they might say that for them saying, we've built in capacity to meet demand.
Mm-hmm.
That could just be the demands they've put to TSMC on their wafer allocation. That might not actually be demand for the market. Or demand for the market for them might be, this is how much we think demand's going to be. It can range from really high to really low, and there's a 50% line, and we've matched that. That doesn't mean they've reached that 100% line. That it's with the GPUs. Did they say ramp this year, launch and ramp this year, or just launch?
They didn't specify.
Yeah, because we might have a situation where they launch 1 or 2 SKUs by the end of the year, and then the rest of the family come out first half of next year, like Alder Lake did this year, right?
I mean, or when they launched Ryzen 5000 series, I mean, by all intents and purposes, that was a very small launch, and we didn't see rampant production until I think well into Q2 of the following year, right?
Yeah,
I
availability.
I think that had a lot to do with the fact that the availability wasn't great on it, and they were selling so much to the enterprise market that they really just didn't have a whole lot of supply to give to consumers.
With Zen 4 being on 5 nanometer, as they ramp down some of their Zen 2 products and maybe even some of their Zen 3 products, that's going to free up some 7 nanometer capacity, which could be used for RDNA 3. So you could have that sort of balance shifting, that the CPU, because there's such a high demand for those chiplets, both Ryzen consumer and in Epic, especially in Epic, with Genoa, that we just see some of the capacity on 6 nanometer shift towards GPU, and they just keep GPU one node behind the CPU.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
That could be a thing.
Related to that, video cards reported a recent, I guess, leak from an AMD employee, which was posted on, I believe, LinkedIn.
Yep.
That basically confirms previous rumors that that at least part of RDNA 3, Navi 31 and Navi 32 GPUs will be based on both 5 nanometer and 6 nanometer process nodes. This kind of confirms the theories before that these will be multi-chip products in terms of their design. Obviously, we don't know exactly the details of that. It can be assumed that multi-chip could just mean. At this point, I think the rumors state clearly that the GPU will be 5 nanometer. The 6 nanometer die is 3D infinity cache that is being stacked in some form or another.
So, just to point out here, this confirms bugger all. This is this is a LinkedIn engineer. Then it's still not an official statement, so it confirms nothing, unfortunately. The fact that it says 5 nanometer, 6 nanometer, it's the way we normally think about when somebody says MCM GPU is that there's compute on both dies.
Mm-hmm.
If this is just stacked cache, we don't typically consider that in a traditional sense MCM. That being said, with you suggesting 5 nanometer compute and a 6 nanometer cache, I don't think TSMC has demonstrated a fundamental cross-process node stacking technology. All their SOIC work to date has been 7-on-7 or 5-on-5. It's not been 7-on-5, for example. But it could also just be a 2D chip. But in traditional MCM sense, it doesn't solve the crux of what MCM GPU is, which is being able to spread compute over multiple dies.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some people say, "Well, this person's going to get fired for presenting this." Nah, they're not.
I don't think so.
It's a mistake. These engineers are already working on stuff 3, 5, 7 years out. It's amazing going to events, speaking to, say, a Mike Clark. I interviewed Mike Clark on my channel recently. He's already thinking about Zen 7 and Zen 8. He literally has to go back in his mind 3-4 years to think, well, let's speak about Zen 3, right? So the engineers have a difficult time understanding that there are people on the outside wanting to look in about the inner workings of what they're doing. They understand NDAs and stuff, but when it's like this, So I wouldn't worry. We expect future GPUs to slowly go down in process node, and that's my take on it anyway. A bit more aggressive than most.
I guess when confirm was probably a bad word. Corroborate previous leaks. Was better. I guess the leaks I've seen in terms of RDNA 3 from quote reliable leakers, meaning people who have been right or close to right before, suggest that the ones that are using a separate infinity cache die are built to be multiple GPU chiplets. So Navi 31 would be 2 graphics core dies. And then in some arrangement with a graphics chiplet. Obviously, I mean, this is all pie in the sky right now, but I think it's interesting from a technological standpoint, whether or not the product actually exists or not. If that's the direction AMD is going in, it's a very interesting one because it's very different from what anybody else is doing. You brought up a good point about the fact that TSMC hasn't demonstrated the ability to stack multi-node processes together like that.
I believe that's true, yeah.
Yeah. Although I guess it's entirely possible that the arrangement is more something like what typical Zen 3...
It could be Foveros-like instead of Vcache-like.
Well, a silly question here. Could it be that they have different products that use the different like they have a cheaper model that it just uses 6 nanometer.
Yeah, I mean the wording here, I guess, is ambiguous, but I mean if you're talking like if you're using the code name Navi31 and then saying that it's on 5 nanometer and 6 nanometer, those would be different code names for those dies then, because they would be different products. Even if it's Navi31A and Navi31B or something. But obviously, like you said, it's just a post on LinkedIn, and it doesn't really detail exactly what he's talking about. I just thought it was interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, the whole MCM GPU issue is the problem is it's the paradigm of GPU compute. And just to separate it into two, you have like a research compute, which is fundamental mathematics. You can split that over multiple dies. That's very easy to do. The problem is when you start rendering graphics. So normally when you have a stream of graphics coming in, graphics compute that needs to come in, you distribute it across all the compute units or all the SMs. And the idea is that the latency to every SM is identical. So you can tell when a frame is going to finish. If you have an MCM issue, if you have an MCM design, then the latency to get to the second chip, even if it's through something like EMIB or the one that AMD is using, FOEB, your latency to the second chip is going to be a lot higher. So it becomes a bit more variable where your frame is going to finish, because you can't always tell how much of the frame is going to be done on the first die versus the second, especially if the first die and the second die have different accesses, different memory address spaces to access, and different communication points to the main GDDR or HBM or whatever it is. The reason why we haven't seen MCM GPUs like that to date isn't only just the packaging, it's being able to manage this latency and being able to manage the architecture for that variable latency situation. So when somebody solves that, that's great. The easiest way to solve it would be going back to massive wide scale interposers, but make them active, back in the whole. Let's bring up butter donuts again and see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, David Wang made a similar point in, I think, 2019 after he came back to Radeon, which was that, when you're dealing with MCM GPUs, you're playing the Crossfire SLI game again, which is how do you, unless you can solve that issue of it's two separate GPUs in terms of how the software vendor sees it, then you're never going to fully utilize the performance of both dies. Hopefully,
David, I was going to say, David's kind of been hidden for the last couple of years, and part of that is because we haven't been able to go to events.
Yeah.
So maybe next time they're ready to talk GPUs for RDNA 3, I'll get him on for an interview. That'd be fun.
Yeah, he's a brilliant guy, and I mean, in my opinion, since he's come back to AMD, to Radeon, I should say, they've done a good job of turning it around in terms of the products they've been able to deliver.
Absolutely.
I mean, pandemic notwithstanding, RDNA 2 is a really good GPU architecture. The
question you have to ask is how much of that was done before David joined?
I mean, yeah.
And I'd say probably about 80-90%. So we're slowly going into the era of products. RDNA 3 might be the first one.
Could be.
Of the David era. Yep.
Look, Ian, all I know is I'm very happy with my 6800 XT, and I'm going to keep saying that over and over on the stream.
You don't earn royalties, mate.
What's that?
You don't earn royalties every time you say it, mate.
I'm just unhappy with the price I paid for it. If I could have paid us, anything closer to sticker, I would have been happier. But we don't live in those times anymore.
Unfortunately, not. I mean, in my opinion, graphics card pricing is just ridiculous, guys. Don't buy anything. Get an Xbox. Like, we could talk about this for years.
I mean, yeah, if you don't want to pay the premium that you're going to have to spend to get a GPU right now, like, buy an Xbox and just wait it out, man.
Hey, you can't, if you can't have that $6,000 holiday to Disneyland this year, get 1.5 GPUs.
Splash
1.5 out on your family.
1.5 GPUs.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, I think that's what's happening to a lot of people is the trips that they had planned, the stuff, and that's where they have all this extra money that they're just sitting there and they're like, all right, I'm going to give like $400 more than I'm supposed to on this thing, but at least it's something for me to do.
Yeah. Luxury. Coming back to luxury.
There's a lot of people that I know that would play golf or would go on fishing trips or whatever, and all that is just off the table. So suddenly you have a ton of fun money.
When I deal with PR agencies for these companies, if they ever accidentally email you their press list, which 2 companies have over the time, you'll see a tab called Lifestyle Press. And we're talking GQ, FHM, that sort of, high-end, wishy-washy, but nice glossy pictures type. At some point, we're going to get a GPU review in one of those magazines.
Oh, yeah. You see that a lot with laptops.
I don't want to see
consoles for sure, but computer parts.
I don't want to see what GQ's review of the RTX 4090 is.
I have to bring this one comment up because it's hilarious. GPUs are getting so lucrative. This is from 2D Realms that the Mexican cartels will switch to semiconductor manufacturing. The Sinaloa cartel has broken ground on their new 5-nanometer foundry and will have 40 ASML EUV machines on order.
I mean, if anyone could do it, it would be them. Those guys are. You want to talk about logistics? They've got that solved, man.
Well,
Mark Gallant has another point here. He says the rich boomers are building ridiculous sim rigs. They'll pay anything.
Yeah,
I actually made a lot of money doing a build for an older guy, like a flight sim build. He wanted like a $6,000 system to run one of the old flight simulators back in the day.
Yep.
And he just didn't care. He was retired. He was bored. He had a lot of money. He just didn't care.
He probably spent another $6,000 on all the connectors for all the switches around his head and the VR headset to play it with. Yeah. Those exist. It's if the Mexican cartels want to make money, TSMC made more money on their older 90-nanometer process nodes than they have in the last quarter than they have done in any quarter in the last 6 years. Mm-hmm. That's how in demand.
That's 90 nanometer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't even realize that was still a thing.
Can you say that again? Because I'm not sure I understood that right.
Intel still has fabs that make 150 nanometer hardware.
And they're profitable.
TSMC.
And
if you go into their financial 10K forms or whatever that on their investor relations, one of them shows either TSMC or Intel basically have a list of all their fabs and the most advanced process node at those fabs, and some of them are 110 nanometer, some of them are 150 nanometer.
Yeah, but that's 150 nanometer plus, right?
It's optimized up the wazoo, yeah.
Yeah, it's optimized. Yeah. Speaking of chip manufacturing, that brings us to our next topic, which is the EU Chips Act and some interesting things unfolding there. Let me pull up this article. So EU backers of chip subsidies want limits on foreign firms. The Chips Act, which aims to spend billions on subsidies to expand Europe's semiconductor output, basically the representatives from Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, and Netherlands are worried that excessive government investment in chip production could lead to a subsidy race between EU countries or even an overproduction of chips, according to people familiar with discussions among the countries. Those nations back the effort toward creating cutting-edge chips, but stress that state aid should go toward innovation more than production, according to the people. The countries don't want to veto the use of state aid, but rather make sure money is spent wisely. Some of these countries also stressed that state aid should go toward bolstering European companies. So, I mean, what I get from that is that these countries don't really actually want to be competing with Asia in terms of chip production. Does that sound right to you, Ian?
I think the problem is that most of the time we focus on leading edge, and what places in Europe do leading edge? Well, we've got Intel Intel's fab in Ireland is going on to their Intel 4 process. You've got the fab in Israel, if you consider that Europe. It's not part of the EU. And then we've also got global foundries in Germany. Right. So and that's not really leading edge. That's like 28, 45 nanometer. Everything else in Europe is those older process nodes, 60, 90, 110, 150. So there are no companies making leading edge process node technologies, and the only European countries making something advanced is on 45, 65, 90. Where Europe does have the lead is in a lot of this innovation, whether it's ASML, which is a Dutch company that also has, a factory in Connecticut. Then we've got places like Soitec, who make wafers. We've got IMEC, that's research. CEA Leti, that's research. So when I go to conferences that are on talking about bleeding edge technology, they're usually papers presented by these companies talking about next generation 2 nanometer equivalent processes. They're talking about backside power delivery to do with 2D transistors. They're talking about latest movements in 3.5 for high voltage use, or embedded use cases in space and improvements there. That's all IP that gets sold or licensed to the big players for their production. So CHIPS Act is everything that's to do with physically producing the chips gets all the headlines, but actually the research that goes into how those chips are made is less glamorous. But ultimately, what these countries are saying is that's where we should invest the money. It may not be the glamorous one, but it's the stuff that resets the curve, the trajectory on which the industry is going. It's during a gold rush, the people who make the money are the ones that sell the pickaxes. So
very much so.
ASML's got a lot of back orders. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
So I have a quick question on this one. Is it not Germany that is the country that produces the most wafers? Like does the actual process from taking the silicon and turning making silicon wafers themselves?
Couldn't tell you. Don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. But I mean, that's just I'd say it's just one part of the supply in terms of manufacturing for silicon.
It's if you take the US CHIPS Act, which I think actually just passed the House today,
Yes.
If most of that money is going to go Intel, Global Foundries, TI, and the few other smaller fabs that are sort of in the Arizona, Texas area, all American companies. So the EU is just saying, well, hang on, we don't want to give a subsidy necessarily to Intel to expand their island fab. Let's reinvest it in ourselves. The problem here, I think, with the EU is that while there may be an EU-wide CHIPS Act, that doesn't stop the individual countries giving their own subsidies, right?
Of course, yeah.
Just in the same way that Arizona and Texas are fighting over where TSMC and Intel are making fabs, and now we've got Ohio in the mix. Yeah, there's one thing to have federal support, and it's another thing to have state support. Though in Europe, state means Europe, not country. Yeah. Terminology aside, I can definitely see the need to invest in local just to make sure that we're not left behind. The question is, are companies like Intel and TSMC gung ho enough about diversifying where their chips are made that they would be interested in settling in places like Europe without subsidies? And
that's
I did see an article that said that, I don't know how true this is, so don't I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying I read this, that Intel might be moving fab equipment out of the US to places like Europe for the sake of using the US Chips Act for subsidies to buy brand new equipment. So because they wouldn't get the subsidy if they were buying new equipment for the fab across the water.
That is
Interesting.
That's the most American thing I can think of.
we have another question here. Seems like Adam in charge is just throwing out the money today. Why are you guys talking about waffles? We're talking about silicon wafers, but you can eat them too.
Ian regularly indulges.
More expensive than traditional. Yeah, see?
I guess I think my take and a lot of people's impression of these various CHIPS Acts is that the goal is to localize production of semiconductors that we all use so much in our daily lives. So that way, when you have the global pandemic part 2 or something like that, that you're not relying so much on international supply chains for the most basic things you need, which at this point, it's fair to say silicon, semiconductors are a basic need at some level, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not the same as food or drink, but it's
at least on a global level. We could say you don't really need a new graphics card. It's not a necessity for you to survive, but a lot of our critical infrastructure uses this stuff.
And when you look at like if you look at automobile manufacturing, even though it's mostly automated, there are manufacturers in every country even for Toyota manufactures plenty of cars here in the US because we're a large market. So it makes sense from a logistics standpoint to just make them here.
And reduce import taxes.
Reduce import taxes and what, even though they're not an American company. So I do think there is something to be said about, Europe investing into more production locally. But I think you're right. Ultimately, the goal should be to invest in research and technologies and such to ensure that the next startup in the next breakthrough in technology might be a European company or something like that.
I could see a lot of the EU money focusing very specifically on the German automotive market because so many automotive chips are 28 nanometer and older. I mean, the microcontroller that adjusts your chair does not have to be on 7 nanometer. It can be on 90 nanometer, and it still only consumes like 0.1 milliamps, right? It's
that's
idle. So I could see some money to this going to global foundries based in Dresden.
Yeah,
because to shore up 28, 45, 90 nanometer.
If you want to talk about industries hit by semiconductor shortages, the automobile industry, I mean, they couldn't produce enough cars because they couldn't get enough steady supply of chips. That's ridiculous.
It's standard automobile on average these days, I think I read, is something like 1,100 chips.
It's something insane, yeah. But this is one of the things that I mentioned to somebody because I saw that there was I get email blasts all the time, and there's these companies that promote like this IoT stuff, or it's like something that they put a microcontroller for a refrigerator or something. They're like, we're on 7 nanometer, we're on 10 nanometer. I'm like, why? Yeah. Why is this important? Like, this is pulling, this is on a pretty new node. Why do you need to be using the new node? Or, we're trying to get ourselves on 5 nanometer. I'm like, why? I think a 28 nanometer refrigerator, LCD control module is like fine.
Yeah.
Like, 3 more watts a week,
Well, I mean, you remember appliances like refrigerators actually have strict power consumption.
That's true.
And whatnot.
Especially in the EU now.
So, I mean,
you can't have your vacuum cleaner over like 1,000 watts now or something. So that's one of the reasons we had Brexit, so we could have high-powered vacuum cleaners.
Go Brexit.
Oh.
What is a high?
With you,
what do you need with a high-powered vacuum cleaner? Like, you try to clean the carpet and you end up like sucking up your cat.
Yep. That was exactly the analogy I was thinking of.
Look, man, I'm an American. I want to have a really high-powered vacuum and a toilet bowl that flushes like 10 gallons.
Are you rolling coal when you flush your toilet?
We're Americans. We could do whatever we want, but Europeans have to be more sensible. Otherwise, world's going to hell.
Too late.
Too late.
Don Draper with a good comment here. TSMC 3 nanometer for my calculator SoC, please. Yeah.
It actually saddens me that Texas
your calculator needs to be connected to the cloud. There, it'll be 3 nanometer.
It's kind of sad. Like Texas Instruments used to actually be an actual like competitor to Qualcomm in the smartphone, space, and that went away really quick.
Yeah, that was that was before ARM standard designs got reasonable, and people were still playing with custom stuff. It was Crate versus OMAP.
Just a quick comment here, because they're going on about GPUs pretty hardcore. There's another elephant in the room. There are really no good games on the horizon, like Dying Light and CP
GTA 6.
I mean, that's like 7 years down the road.
I mean, they're talking about it, so probably not.
Are the blueprint of what every title will be about for this whole gen? I mean, yeah. So the other issue is, I feel like if you're still gaming at 1080p, everything that's past like a 6600 XT is probably overkill unless you really want to crank everything to max all the time. So I think that's kind of the issue here.
For you normies, a 6600 XT is about the same as a 3060 Ti.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
People only speak in NVIDIA numbers, Alex. I don't know what's wrong with you.
They're really talking about value and economics in the chat. It's just going off, man.
It's I interviewed Raja Kaduri last week. This week just gone. The review itself is embargoed for a couple of weeks. But he was talking about the demand for more and more graphics, for higher and higher resolutions, higher and higher accuracy. He was saying how the game developers just want more because they want to do more and they want future games to be more. So, when Mark Cerny over at PlayStation is saying exactly the same thing, it's they when they built the PS5, for example, storage, the developers said they wanted 1 gigasec sequential, and they went ahead and implemented a 5 gigasec sequential internal SSD because they wanted to 10x everything. And the fact that they can do audio through the ray tracing units on that thing, that sort of stuff.
Absurd.
People want more compute. It's
speaking of powerful graphics and ray tracing. I think we have our next topic up, Donny.
That's a great segue.
That is a great segue. So,
welcome, guys. I'm really good at this.
Let me share my screen again.
Sometimes I get paid for this.
Do you? I don't think so.
Not in dollars.
Oh, you get paid in exposure. I mean, there's plenty of people watching.
I get paid in SSD boxes, so I get paid in.
So that's great. So Valve's Steam Deck will have FSR support enabled as a native OS feature. Basically, what they're saying is while games that already support FSR will work as usual, you'll also be able to turn on FSR for any game through the OS with an OS update. So that might mean that it's not going to be there at launch, but it will be there eventually. This is very similar to AMD's upcoming RSR, or Radeon Super Resolution, which is a driver level feature for Radeon graphics cards that enables support for FSR upscaling for most games. Will this improve the experience on the Steam Deck, given the small hardware size and relatively small screen compared to most gaming PCs?
So this will mean you can render it at 320, and it will show at 800p on the screen. I've pitched for a while that needs to happen more on Zoom first, because everybody's picture looks like ravioli on Zoom if you're in a big call. If they can send me a 240p image and my graphics card can upscale that to 1080 just so it's a bit clearer,
What
there'd
if
be demand for that rather than gaming.
Super clear, so people don't comment on our couches.
We're not talking about like a Jeffrey Toobin sort of Zoom call, are we?
Oh no.
But yeah, it's what I think this will be used more for is trying to provide a consistent experience as the battery winds down, and they try to extend the life of the battery by reducing your resolution from 8 to 6 to 4. It's like, how low can you go before somebody notices? Back in the day, I'm not sure if you guys are old enough, but Walkmans with cassettes running AA batteries, when they ran low, your music got slower.
Yeah, that's true.
So maybe this is a case that the Steam Deck, as you get as the battery winds down, the quality of your gaming resorts to downscaling the internal rendering and upscaling it afterwards.
Well, I guess I only thought about it as like a toggle that you can turn on and like choose the profile yourself. But the idea of it being a dynamic setting as well that just enables on itself in the back end is really interesting. I wonder if that is something they'll implement.
Well, it's like so I was playing Forza Horizon. I literally set my resolution and my expected quality settings, and if it says medium, and it'll automatically dynamically adjust which features to toggle mid-game as I'm playing based on my frame rate. So if it suddenly turns rainy and there's more post-processing distortion effects, it will decrease some of the other quality settings to make sure I keep 60 or 90 FPS, right? So,
or in my case, 244 FPS or 240 FPS.
Yeah, things like dynamic resolution scaling or even variable rate shading and stuff are very interesting and I think practical ways to maintain to maintain a certain FPS level. So you, rather than, I mean, for me, if I'm playing a game, especially a competitive one, rather than during a really intense scene, I have to dip to 48 FPS, my quality goes down, but I'm still at the same frame rate number. That's a better experience because I won't notice. I mean, even if I notice the dip in quality, it might be a few seconds and I won't notice it as much as I would notice a drastic dip in frame rate.
Well, let's play this experience out. You're in an FPS, right? When the FPS drops happen is when there's a lot of destruction, a lot of people on the screen, a lot of chaos. You might not notice that the smoke isn't as clear as it was before because there's too much going on. You're trying to snap onto somebody's, you're trying to snap onto somebody's body, somebody's head.
You might not even see the smoke because smoke rendering might be disabled.
Which could
Wouldn't
be
people like that?
That?
Wouldn't people want that?
Client-side smoke rendering in competitive shooters. I like it.
And that is the worst thing. That is, I don't know why so many developers do that. I know why. Because it's less strain on the server, but it is so bad. Because someone will just pop you right through the smoke and you'll be like, I didn't even see him. And he's like, dude, you were just out in the open. What are you talking about?
You clear as
dude.
day.
Get good. Get good, scrub.
Get good indeed.
Speaking of getting good and being a scrub, Sony buys Bungie.
Yeah, well, actually, before we get into that, I wanted to get you guys' general thoughts more on the Steam Deck since it's approaching soon. Well, I mean, from a hardware standpoint, like, what do you think of it, Ian?
I think I've been pretty clear. I think it's just a flash in the pan, one-hit wonder. Valve rarely has any longevity when it comes to hardware production. I feel like it's going to be too much of a compromise, especially what they're quoting 2.5, 3 hours battery life. It's in my mind, I'd rather if I just wanted a gaming system, I get a Switch. Whereas if I wanted a PC or a laptop, I'd get a laptop.
I guess my only counter to that point would be there are a variety of products in the market today, like the Aya Neo that exists, or the One X player, that are providing the exact sort of experience, or maybe not the exact experience, but the sort of product that the Steam Deck is, which is a portable like handheld gaming PC. And though I mean those cost a lot more money. I think the minimum you're going to spend on one of those is about $800. So obviously there's some subsidization going on here from Valve's standpoint.
Valve has the content delivery platform, right?
Right.
Those guys don't. But also, you could argue Valve is going to be giving much better customer support than those guys as well.
They should be,
because customer support from a Chinese company isn't great at the best of times. It's compared. It's too big for mobile play, right?
It is a rather large device. I don't think most people realize that it's much bigger than a Switch.
It's unless everybody at Valve is wearing cargo pants, and
they might be.
I mean, you see kids playing with Switches all the time in public transport and going on flights and what have you. I can see people bringing out the Steam Deck in a flight because they've got it in their backpack, but would they do it on the underground?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not.
Yeah,
I don't. I mean, that being said, I mean, I don't really think about this so much as being able to just take it anywhere, as much as being able to just play on my couch or in bed or whatever, and have the PC games I like to play, available to me in various circumstances. Most people I know with a Switch don't actually take it anywhere.
It's the thing is, I have a HTPC in my front room that doubles as my VR machine, and I also have a wireless Xbox controller that I have it connected to it. So I have all my games there. Do I really need them that far away from my face on something that's rendering at 800p? That's going to die in 2.5 hours, and I can just okay. You're in a room with other people, but then that just comes back to the whole Switch versus whatever. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is I see a lot of people arguing the Switch versus the Steam Deck thing.
They're completely different products.
This has so much more performance. Look at the performance. This can do this, this, and this. And it's like, well, people buy the Switch to play Mario Party.
Nobody who buys a Switch cares about the performance. If you're making that argument, you're not a Switch customer. Like it's just.
But so take performance out of the way. What are they going to be used for? Exactly the same thing. Playing games. Do I realistically see people using this to do spreadsheets? No,
I mean more in the idea like you can play, like you can play like all these like PC games, and you could play all these different games that aren't on the Switch. And I'm like, I guess, but I don't know. Again,
HUD's going to be tiny.
So my personal,
the adaptation to being a smaller screen doesn't work well for every game. And I know that just from streaming games to my phone, which is a comparable experience.
Some games probably has higher screen resolution as well. So
it does. Yes.
I feel like for me, I would rather just stream the thing to it's doing like an in-home streaming thing to my laptop or to my TV in my bedroom, and connect an HDMI cable to something and use my TV and an Xbox controller, like you said. I personally don't see a whole lot of value in it, but I mean, I guess for some people there is.
Is there room in the market for handheld gaming devices for there to be more than one major player?
I would say yes.
I just don't think that Valve's iteration is going to be that much of a hit, besides for a very limited market.
If it was Microsoft or Sony coming out with something, they have the backing, they have the knowledge of developing consoles to come to the market. Valve has too much of a history of letting their hardware die.
I mean, they had the Steam boxes. That whole thing never really turned into anything.
Yeah.
I see in some ways the Steam Deck is a 2.0 of that, because it's another effort to make Linux gaming a thing, which I mean I think is overall good. And if the Steam Deck has a positive impact on the adoption of Linux in gaming, that's a good thing, both from the developer side and from the consumer side. On the other hand, as a standalone product, I think the Steam Deck on its own will probably be successful in that. I think Valve will probably sell what they make because it's cheap. $400 is for the starting price is really inexpensive for what they're offering. Whether or not they will continue to iterate and make more generations of products, I mean, you make a good point that they've basically never done that. I mean, they had the original, when it comes to VR, they had the HTC Vive, which was technically a Valve product that they co-developed with HTC, and then they created their own in-house version called the Valve Index. But the Valve Index became an even more premium, even more niche product, whereas the HTC Vive, I would say, while VR at the time in general was very niche and very premium, it almost did better than the Oculus in a lot of respects. I mean, at least the enthusiasts really liked it better. And it had just as much mind share in the VR space. Whereas the Index, I mean, is completely outshined by, the Oculus Quest 2, which I have hanging over here. Part of that is because obviously introductory price. I mean, but I think at this point, Valve isn't really interested in being a massive consumer electronics brand, right? I think they just want to make these kind of one-off products to push a certain agenda that they have from a platform standpoint.
Yeah, and the comment that's just been put on, it needs a first-party exclusive hit.
Yeah, for those listening, KM Pewter Tech Supplies, which always gives some great feedback. For handheld gaming to be a hit, you're going to need an exclusive game that only makes sense to play on the go, like Pokemon or something. Which, I mean, again, like I said, people buy a Switch to play Mario Party or Mario Kart or whatever.
Super Mario Maker, just Mario. They buy it to play Mario or Animal Crossing. There we go. Let's have a non-Mario.
That is an incredibly fair point. The problem is the idea of an exclusive game completely flies in the face of what Valve is all about. So they wouldn't do it. Well, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, they might encourage developers to come up with game ideas that might be unique in the sense of the experience you can get in a handheld situation on the Steam Deck. They aren't going to make anything exclusive to the Steam Deck.
Was Half-Life Alex launched on any other platform?
No.
I mean, it's a Steam game. It can be played on any PC, but obviously it's a VR only game.
Yeah. So in that way, they could do an exclusive Steam Deck game, but it would, if I say Linux only. But there won't be enough of a market initially for that unless it came free with it, like a Wii Sports. So there you go. What are the bundled games with the Steam Deck? None, because they assume you already have 2,000 in your library.
And but I think that's the selling point of the Steam Deck, though. It's another way to access your massive Steam library. I don't think that's for everyone.
I think for some people, there's definitely games where the hardware isn't super important because there's a ton of more indie titles or not particularly graphically intensive games that would totally be great on a handheld. There's a lot of JRPGs that are on Steam now that I'm sure people have bought for like $7 on a sale. There's a lot of turn-based strategy games where this is fine, and I think it's good for them. But I don't know how many people that necessarily is.
And again, if you're still only running to 2-3 hours battery life, I don't wear earpods when I'm out and about because they only have 2-3 hours battery life. I wear these because they have 10 to 11 hours battery life.
I mean, you could say maybe this is something somebody would use instead of a laptop if they're traveling. Or, but then wouldn't you just want a laptop if you're traveling anyways?
There's no way that tiny screen is going to replace a laptop. I mean, obviously you can use an external portable monitor, but
no, I don't. I mean, more in the idea
as
a gaming thing that you take in your hotel room and you sit on your bed and you play this thing. But
we're at an age now where people are used to binging. So we're not just turning on a game and playing for 30 minutes, then turning it off and doing whatever. We're sitting down, we're playing for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. And that, I mean, personally for me, that's changed because back when I was at school, obviously you only had half an hour, then you had to get on with work. But the games were so simple back then, you didn't need to wait for a 40 gigabyte update. before you played your game. You know, it
I mean,
would be interesting to see the average per session playtime of people who use handheld devices versus PCs these days.
I've seen in myself
Probably
my
lower.
ability to binge games that are not multiplayer has gone down drastically. With multiplayer games, it's a bit different because, you know, there's the social aspect, and there's, come on, let's do another one. We had a really good round this time. Let's do another one. With the single player stuff, I find myself having trouble sitting for longer than an hour.
Unless it's Civ.
As much as I've enjoyed,
Well, that's why I don't play Civ anymore. That's why I try to avoid a lot of the Paradox games too, like City Skylines, Hearts of Honor, CK2, because those games are absolutely a time suck.
As much as I've enjoyed God of War on the PC, I've not finished it yet. And yeah, I mean, when I play it, I probably play for about an hour and get up.
You see, for me, I'm getting to the point now where if I'm going to play a game for an hour or two, it's going to be something that I can throw a few bucks at, but not pay full price. I mean, I keep saying I'm playing Forza. It's Forza Horizon 4. And I only got that because it was on discount. I don't want Forza Horizon 5 because that's still full price, right?
I pay for the Xbox service thing because I use a lot of the games in the benchmarking suite anyways. So.
But we're also getting to a point now, okay, where if graphics cards are hard to come by, just bringing it a bit full circle, maybe we're in an era of a multi-year lag in gaming. If this is the best graphics card you can buy, then you're still going to be playing games that are 4 or 5 years old.
That's true. That's true. And I think
that's perfectly valid way. I mean, if you're going to be singing "The Cake Is a Lie" to me 20 years after it happened, then maybe you can go away. But yeah, Portal 2, they're still great games to play today. That sort of thing.
I mean, there's a lot of more puzzle or story-based games that I play now that I haven't caught up on. I'm actually beating some of the old Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior games just on my free time, which are, you know, RPGs from the 90s. But
you should be playing your FPSs. Come on, get good, scrub.
Well, I play my FPSs, but those are with my friends, and we all yell at each other as to why the other one shot us. But that's a Tarkov thing because there's no HUD and there's no like who's your teammates, and friendly fire is always on. So
Tarkov is kill your friend simulator. Let's be honest.
It's a lot of fun though.
To address the comment you put up on screen here, Technus Corner said, "I agree. Multiplayer is much more immersive due to the social aspects and not feeling like too much isolation has occurred. Quote, growing forward as adults."
I mean, especially now, a lot of friends that I have that are moved away. You know, this is a good way to keep in touch with them.
I don't think I play any multiplayer games with friends. You have to have friends to do that first, though.
I mean,
one day, Ian, I'm gonna get you into some get good scrub games. One day.
I mean, there has to be a point where you did play multiplayer games, like.
Yeah, I was Battlefield 2142.
That's a good one.
Played that in a clan at one point before Discord and YouTube was a thing back in the mid 2000s.
Did you get a chance to try the new
talking about Ventrilo? Sorry, you're talking about Ventrilo?
Before Trello.
Might have been...
Okay. No, Ventrilo. Vent.
Oh.
Ventrilo, TeamSpeak, Mumble. Those
TeamSpeak, that's what we used,
TeamSpeak.
Yeah, it's... the sort of... Back when LAN parties were a thing, that's what it was. It was always good in 2142, launching onto the back of your own Titan as they were attacking, because they couldn't see you planting C4 behind them and you get 6 kills in a row.
2142 was a very different Battlefield game from other ones, and they have yet to recapture that sort of gameplay experience.
I don't think I've played a Battlefield game since.
Really?
Battlefield 3 and 4 were so good.
Battlefield 3 was a very good Battlefield. Yeah.
The new one is okay. There's a lot of issues with it, but it's as close as I can get to playing Battlefield 3 when it came out, if that makes sense.
the problem with those games I see now is if you want to just jump in random matches, you have to have a good 40, 50 hours experience first. Otherwise, your KD is going to be not great for a long time as you learn the map, as you learn the best weapons for the best situation. You got to a point in 2142 where I was happily jumping around tower blocks with a knife. And you're like, I got your dog tags, ha! And that was fun for me because people would be coming in, they wouldn't know what to do.
Ian, did you ever were you ever much of a Halo player?
No.
Ian's not a console guy. I could tell you, Ian's just probably.
I was the first Halo was on PC.
I was Xbox 360. I spent a couple of years in the hole trying to get as much gamer score as you can thing until I hit top 250 in the world and realized that my life was worth actually living. And decided to quit.
You hit top 250 in the world.
Something like that.
That's insane.
I think my account's on 140,000 or something. So,
wow. Oh, we lost Donny again.
No, I'm still here.
Your camera died.
Yes, it did. I will address that in a moment.
But yeah, I mean, I guess we can hit the Sony buys Bungie topic now.
Yeah, let me segue into that for you guys, and then
you can bring that up, right, instead of without being in the dark.
Yes.
David, PUBG was really fun on PC when it came out to me. I really enjoyed that game. That was a game that I had a lot of fun fragging people in. Very different experience, and a lot of people didn't know what they were doing, and they kind of didn't understand the sort of like the meta or how to play the game. That's another thing I've noticed about myself. When a genre or a gameplay style is kind of new, I'm really good at picking it up and getting really good at it. It's less when something gets more established, you need to have a lot more hours involved in it, and there's a lot more like minute details and mechanics that get involved. Whereas in the beginning, I just kind of understood high ground positioning, where the hot zones in the map were, and that sort of stuff. And then as that game evolved, it got more and more sort of fine-tuned.
Actually, I'll tell a lie. The last multiplayer game that I was probably into was Borderlands 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm. I mean, those are more like co-op.
You're limited to 4
games.
People. Yeah, co-op. And that was fun because, my brother and I were playing around. And but I've still not completed Borderlands 3.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the prequel was very difficult to get into, and I just haven't put in the time to Borderlands 3. Because Borderlands 1, you used to be able to mod it very heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kind of patched all that out, and now further on with Borderlands 3, again, they're limiting with patches.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do GTA 5 online a little bit, but then I just got really annoyed with the loading times. And then
the loading times are insane, man. The amount of times me and my friends were like, let's get on. It's like 5 guys. We're going to do the stuff. We're going to do the heists. And then you get on.
I mean, this was before the patch that came out last year to improve loading times.
Mm-hmm.
But then also,
funny that it took them 7 years.
Well, it wasn't even them that found it, wasn't it? So
it was some guy.
Yeah, But then I also used that same account for my benchmarking, and somehow, somewhere, for whatever reason, it overwrote my cloud save. After about 35 hours in, and since then I haven't been bothered. So
that's the problem with benchmarking games. Is one issue I was running into is I end up benchmarking something so much that I never actually want to play it because I'm sick of it. Like
the issue I had is that I just didn't have a separate Steam account for my benchmarking, and I still don't, which is stupid because you should have. I mean, it means you have to buy everything twice. Once if you want to play it, once if you want to test it.
Just to catch this last comment, Total War Warhammer 3 comes out in about a week. Best games of 2022. I will not tolerate the slander of no good games coming out. That's probably something I'm going to add to my benchmark suite. So thanks for reminding me, My Little Pony.
So our final topic for today is more in the gaming stuff. Sony has bought the developer of Halo and Destiny, Bungie, for about $3.6 billion. They claim that Bungie will continue to be a multi-platform and independent studio and publisher, and will retain full creative control. Although, I mean, that's shaky at best.
Nobody retains full creative control.
Right.
Distributors
Because at the end of the day,
have the iron hammer. Yeah.
The new owner of the company can fire you if you don't do what they say. So, that being said, given
multi-platform doesn't take out the possibility of limited exclusives.
Yes,
that's true.
It also doesn't say that they won't be holding, future titles as exclusives.
Well, that being said, given the recent acquisitions by Microsoft and this new one by Sony, do you think there's an over-consolidation happening in the gaming industry?
I mean, it's been happening for years with EA, right? How many of my favorite developers have felt the cold steel of an EA bullet in the back of their heads?
That's true.
So,
EA, where developers go to die.
Yeah, and was it the original studio who did GTA, which is now Rockstar North, and
I think Rockstar has been owned by Take-Two for quite a while now.
It was that was maybe 15 years ago that happened.
Yeah.
But this has always been happening. This has always happened.
The issue is when new game studios sort of come out of thin air with new people. They have a couple of hits, and then they get purchased by somebody, and then they go to die. It's the way that the game industry is just in creating games, and the whole stereotypical crunch, and there's no money to pay their developers enough, but they still, some make millions and billions and others fall flat on the face. And there will always be investments in new IP. Just the big companies will obviously stick with what makes them money, and if that's old IP, and that's why there are how many Fast and Furious movies, it's how many MCU movies there are. There's just going to be just as many Halo games, and
I mean, look, I think that there's going to be some interesting titles, but honestly, I've noticed over the past 5 years, the Steam Greenlight stuff, the more backer stuff, the way the distribution has become easier, a lot of really good developers are existing, and you're seeing a renaissance of, before we were gamers, where it would, there's a developer like, I think Stardew Valley is one of these games where it's literally one guy who's hired 2 or 3 people to help him, and he just updates the game. And this is just something that he does. Where, you used to have a guy code some game for Amiga in his basement. I think you're seeing a renaissance of a lot of that. Or you're having independent studios where it's 10 or 20 people who are working on a game, and they get to make the thing that they want. I think what we're seeing is a reduction in the really good sort of AAA titles that are really mass marketed and budgeted, where they're kind of, floundering because they're forced to make a very specific kind of game. EA only makes a handful of games a year. Ubisoft only makes 10 or so games a year. In the past, you would see, as a publisher, these companies making hundreds of games, dozens of games, 50 or you're not seeing that as much now. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of these companies sort of reset that sort of cycle. And you see really talented people breaking off and making their own studios over and over again.
I mean, there will always be shovelware.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the instance where you have successful IP that you want to milk continuously, versus trying to create some new IP. There's just less of an appetite, because they know the chance of a new IP working in the modern era is 10%, 5%, even from a big studio, let alone from an indie studio.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing about crowdfunding games, I think, has actually been somewhat of a negative. Because the minute you start saying, I'm going to create this game, if you pay me for a copy now, that will fund development to the end. We get games that are delayed. We get games that don't necessarily have everything that was promised, or games that get abandoned at the end. Whereas prior to crowdfunding, you'd have venture capital. You'll have an angel investor come in, say, I'll give your studio $1 million if you give me 50% of the rights to the title or whatever. And the game that came out was almost a finished product. Back in the day when we didn't have automatic updates, downloads, and Gandhi declared nuclear war on everybody because that was never patched out, sort of thing, right?
I mean, I think that's the important thing too. Yeah, I think that's the important thing too, is that even the sort of AAA venture capitalist developers still have massive bugs when they come out. I mean, how big of a developer is Bethesda? And every Skyrim game is always a nightmare. I mean, and let's say Skyrim is an exception. There are tons of games that come out unfinished that you give $60 for.
Cyberpunk 2077.
But developers get paid for producing stuff that makes money, not for fixing stuff that's already been sold.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever worked in QA?
I have not.
So
I can imagine.
So the whole trope about QA being vastly underpaid and you having to run into a wall for 3 weeks to replicate a bug is true. But even if you are the best QA technician, even if you find that bug, you're able to detail it. You can arguably tell the coder how to fix it because you understand it so well. You're relying on the coder actually having time to dedicate to finish for filing bug reports,
and his manager to say it's worth his time to do this.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's they get paid for more for creating more DLC post game launch than they do for fixing the bugs.
I just think that it's offered the early access thing has offered a lot of interesting ideas that probably wouldn't have ever gotten funded by a VC. You oftentimes see a lot of, you guys want to make this, okay, but like let's shovel our brand that exists IP and stick it under that name, and let's actually change the game entirely what you want to make it something that sells because we have a focus group. With one guy who's already got the money from you, he's free to totally blow that thing up or make his vision. Which, if you're investing a ton of money in this and you get blown out, like I can see why this is aggravating. If you drop $400 on a, making some game that you want to see made happen, like Star Citizen, I think people have paid tons and tons of money and they still haven't gotten what they've asked for.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's sunk cost fallacy as well, right? I think Star Citizen's a big example of that. But also, we have a lot of indie developers who have never made something and they rely on crowdfunding and they just don't realize how much effort is going into concept, basic design, final design, finishing. Because you can spend another 6 to 8 months in finishing if you don't think it's perfect, and then somebody knocks on your door and says, right, actually get it out the door now, even if it might be not perfect. When it comes to this desire to be crowdfunded, to have everything online, means that you're under the scrutiny of everybody the whole time, and if you have no experience in that, you can suffer. Then again, you can have the biggest names on the planet and they will still screw you over. Peter Molyneux, Double Fine Productions, just to name a couple, right?
Oh, yes.
It becomes more to the gaming industry just becoming that sort of wild west of development. Lots of burnt out people, no guarantee that an IP will ever, make any money or that the right investment will be made. I mean, how many films have you seen that had multi-million-dollar budgets that were marketed the crap out of, and people just turned around and said, nah, it's stupid, it's useless, we're not going to pay money for that. Then again, the game industry is bigger than the film industry these days. There's just, where you've got your Paramount, you've got your, first-party studio. So,
but I guess now we can sort of head into the Q&As section. Or realistically, the questions that I wanted to ask you. Um, so do you think that AMD would be able to remain competitive with Intel long term?
The hope is yes. The AMD has the benefit of being smaller and more agile. And speaking with people like Mike Clark, speaking with people like Jim Keller, both of which I have interviews with on my channel.
Which you should absolutely check out. They're great interviews.
It's the way that they seem to have re-architected their design philosophy. The whole thing of don't do a plus, you know, just, I mean, I'm not specifically talking about the meme, I'm just talking about the general of there's no point always doing update. At some point you have to do fresh paper redesign. And speaking with Jim, it was and with Mike, it was clear that the whole industry goes about doing fresh redesigns in general once every 7 to 10 years. I mean, how much is Comet Lake like Skylake at the end of the day? It's got micro-op cache and it's got some more execution units and it does AVX 512 at the end of the day. So AMD's philosophy now is let's do a ground-up redesign every 3 years. So Zen 3 was meant to be a ground-up redesign. Zen 5 will be a ground-up redesign. Zen 7 is likely to be a ground-up redesign. If not Zen 7, then Zen 8. The whole point is when you're on that path of performance for your core, when you put the building blocks down, you've got a static line. So you build it and you're at point 1. You then get all the low-hanging fruit for that, and that becomes your next generation product. And then you reset the baseline. So you can go further up the curve. Then you reset the baseline and you go further up the curve. And that's becoming the whole philosophy of AMD, at least on the CPU side. When it comes to other things, they've got to think about GPUs and packaging. The argument that the Xilinx acquisition is good because Xilinx has experience in packaging. I wouldn't say Xilinx has more experience in packaging. I would say Xilinx has complementary experience in packaging. So there are things that could be done there. And I'm not talking about CPU plus FPGA. I'm just talking about CPU doing some other fancy stuff and also GPU doing some fancy other stuff, just like this fan out embedded bridge that's in the MI250X, for example. That's quite novel. That's not using TSMC. That's using an external OSAT, which is really different to what AMD's done before. But if they can get it to work, that's their equivalent of EMIB sorted, and they haven't had to spend 12 years trying to bring it to market at a reasonable yield. And it's better yielding than EMIB, I would think, based on how I've seen what the technology is meant to do. So the Intel has more engineers, so they can come up with more ideas. The problem is they have to filter out the best ideas. The only issue where it comes down to future is if we're still relying on the leading edge for the highest performance node, for the highest performance in compute. That may not always be the case in the future as we go to a more chiplet tile architecture design. But if AMD can't be on leading edge at TSMC, that's where Intel's big in is. Now, what does it mean? Absolutely crush? Probably not. What would require for that is for somewhere on the line somebody to trip up. And I think that's probably the biggest instance of a trip up. And just like 10 nanometer being a trip up for Intel, what could be the potential trip up for AMD? AMD's diversifying its product portfolio, right? That's why Xilinx is in the picture. It's if CPU has a bad cycle, then maybe FPGA can pick up some of the mix, and it's all about growing that market. Just in the same way that Intel used to be purely CPU, now they do FPGA, now they do memory, now they do Ethernet, now they do silicon photonics, now they do neuromorphic. It's all about developing different, just like in the same way I was saying earlier about Linus having multiple businesses to bring in revenue, just in the same way that an investor will put money into 10, 12, 20, 50 different companies. They're hedging their bets in the sense that if something goes wrong, the rest can pick up the slack. And that's AMD's not in that position yet, but they're moving towards it. So,
which I think is always good. I think, even from the, like, personally from the individual level, I think people should have multiple streams of income. And this just only gets more and more important as you go larger and wider.
yeah, and it comes back to how much do you want to grow?
Yeah.
Or are you happy with what you've got, or do you want to grow? It's very easy to stand still.
There's not a lot of risk in standing still, but for companies this large, it might actually be more of a risk to try to stand still because things change outside of your control.
Semiconductors, it used to be the business where you bet the company every generation, otherwise you failed. That is not really the case anymore because these companies are so big, they have multiple elements of revenue. With Intel, it's still CPU weighted. GPU might change that.
We got a super chat question for, I think it's for you, Ian. They didn't specify, but do you think Xilinx may have a secret potential with FPGAs for something new like AI or some kind of self-programming silicon?
No.
Okay.
No. A lot of people are thinking, well, okay, Xilinx, the acquisition of Xilinx allows AMD, for example, to have like an FPGA chiplet on board. Intel's already done that. It didn't sell well. Could AMD do it better? Possibly. Is there a market for it? Probably not. That's the problem.
Don't
the way
FPGAs by nature have like much higher power consumption compared to?
No. It's the big one. The big ones go up to 300 watts. Yes, but so do CPUs now, and so do GPUs. So it's just in the nature of the way that you program them. What I see Xilinx in this situation being for AMD is essentially just a separate business unit. In the same way that Samsung white goods and Samsung smartphone are very unlikely to interact, but they're both Samsung.
Right.
Samsung fridges and Samsung smartphones are different ends of the tech market. I see AMD acquiring Xilinx, then going, well, if you want to use a Xilinx FPGA, then you should probably use an AMD CPU. Right. And the synergy there is going to be, okay, well, whatever connectivity standard in generations 3-5 years ahead, let's make sure they both have them and let's work forward from there. Actually putting, say, an FPGA chiplet on a CPU, or you could argue putting Zen cores in an FPGA would be better. It's more beneficial for Xilinx in that context rather than beneficial for AMD. Intel with Altera kind of screwed the pooch a little because they tried to integrate the company too quickly, too fast, and then put all their future products on Intel's 10 nanometer, which, won't say again, but it kind of grabbed the bed at the time. So now Altera's market share equivalent, Intel's PSG, is a fraction of what it used to be. Xilinx is dominating the market in that sort of high-end FPGA space, high mid-end FPGA space. Now, Altera's kind of coming back on a resurgence with its Agilex product line, but yeah, if AMD leaves Xilinx alone, I think that's the best situation for AMD. Right? Just let them do what they do. I met the CEO of Xilinx, Victor Peng, like the week after he got the job because he was doing a tour of the world and meeting press, and I didn't really know how to approach him at the time. But he seemed to be calm and had his head screwed on, and he was making sure he was saying the right things. He was very new to PR as well, but he's an engineer at heart as well. So
those are the best PR people for people like us. We have Technus Corner saying, smash that like button if you've been here this long and send some crypto the boys' way. Unfortunately, the crypto account that is in the bio, I'm 99% sure is Jim's personal account. So you would be sending Jim the crypto, but whatever.
We do have a Patreon.
And we do really appreciate all the super chats.
Intel's making crypto chips now.
Of course they are.
There's going to be a presentation on it in a couple of weeks. I've got an article on it on AnandTech. Search for Intel BZM1.
Interesting.
Intel's actually on a second generation chip now, and they've already sold a good number of those.
What maybe you can't talk
Bitcoin
about
ASIC.
Bitcoin ASIC. Okay, I was gonna.
Yeah.
So For
makes sense.
anybody who's asking questions, if you want to be put to the top of the line, the super chats really help do that, but I will try to get to those. But we have some more questions that me and Donnie sort of wanted to ask Ian, which is, how do you think Intel will do in the graphics market, and do you expect them to even go after the DIY PC space in any real significant way?
They've been promising, haven't they?
They have. It's been a lot of talk recently, especially.
Yeah, so like I say, I did interview Raja this past week. The topic I was interviewing him on was Zetascale and Metaverse, so not discrete GPUs. I did ask him a discrete GPU question, because otherwise I know everybody would, put me on a spike and burn me at the stake if I didn't.
We have to. I mean, this is 99% of the conversation that's been going on in the comments.
It's so it's I won't tell you the question, but he did give the answer that all of his GPUs are his baby. So the issue I think Intel has right now is the fact that they keep promising that, that the deadlines that they're promising and the distribution that they've been promising, it always seems to be delayed and minimized. I mean, we keep saying Q1, right? Desktop. And then they show a picture that says Q1 laptop, and then they remove Q1 from the website. Yeah, and it's I ask, and they say, oh yeah, no, we're in 50 we're already going to be shipping to OEM partners, and we're in 50 models. It's like, of laptops.
Where?
And no,
yeah.
For me, I'm focusing on discrete gaming GPUs, because that's what you can put them in as many laptops as you like. Tell me where they are in discrete, and so I've got a feeling that if we are going to see them in discrete, it will be the end of the first half of this year. So Intel always do this thing of they did it with 10 nanometer. They said we are shipping for revenue at the end of 2017, and they confirmed this by having a small 2-second line or in CES 2018, the morning after the keynote at 8 a.m., a 10-minute presentation by Greg Bryant at their booth. And it was literally him spouting about how good Intel is. Then the last 2 seconds were, oh, by the way, we've shipped 10 nanometer for revenue. And we were all like, what the hell? Literally saying that just because they wanted to meet a deadline they promised their investors. That was Cannon Lake, and we all know the story about Cannon Lake. So
very impressive product, very available in the market. Tons of people had Cannon Lake products. Just, yeah. Of course you do. Of course you do.
It's there.
Of course the doctor has one. One of 8 in the world.
I did the first review, so
I know.
That thing's good. You should sign it. It'll be worth money one day.
No, it won't. So, and the fact that it's on TSMC and we still don't have any clear-cut idea of how much volume Intel has had on. So TSMC defect rate of 7 nanometer is something like 0.07 per square centimeter, which is really, really, really low. But that doesn't account for the yield rate for frequency, right? Which is a different multiplicative factor on the yield curve. So we don't know how many, we don't know how fast. There are so many unconfirmed leaks and images that I'm just ignoring them until Intel turns around and says to me, we're ready to talk about this.
You mean you're also tired of seeing leak after leak of DG2 boards constantly? Because I know I am.
To the point where I don't even see them. They're like ads. They just filter out of my vision.
I literally just ignore it at this point.
Yeah, and I fully expect Intel to come along and say, hey, we've got a briefing about our discrete graphics. And you'll say, what, desktop discrete? And they go, oh no, laptop discrete. Because they've done this thing now where they're just saying discrete and not saying laptop or desktop. And that's
because
really paying me off. The thing is, they know it, right? The thing is, I know the people in that marketing team. I speak with them. and they're really cautious in what they say, but they kind of do it with the, why we have to say it this way, right? And it's like, yes, I know, I don't approve of,
They give you
Pat
it with a wink
Gelsing-
and a nod. Like,
no, it's
we
not
know
even
it's-
that. It's just a slight. Pat Gelsinger said, "We want to be open. We want to be the company that's open about our technology, open about our software, open about our hardware." Well, open then, right? If it's going to be late, tell us. Okay, the
Yeah,
market
I
will
mean-
say boo-hoo, but give us some reasonable expectations. Don't just
at
say.
the end of the day, they can be as open as they want, but they're still going to be Intel, and they're still going to be worried about shareholders and whether or not their stock is going to take a massive dive because they decided to say one little thing about we're probably going to do a little late.
Their stock is. They've already said that they're going for 51% gross margins this year and next year. Intel normally has 65. Excuse me. Oh, all that water I was drinking has come up. They said 65% gross margins they've had for the last decade or more, and now they're saying 51% as they increase capital expenditure, as they increase just build out, and the fact that they're going to have to take hit for new process nodes coming online. It's once they get Intel 4 up and running on EUV, they're going to drop 10 nanometer like a brick.
Speaking of their new node names, somebody in the comments from last week gave me so much grief about saying angstrom rather than angstrom, and I'm like, man, I don't like what? Come on, like
I don't know how to read.
Jelly beans.
Another question we had is, looking to the future, what potential technological breakthroughs excite you the most? By the way, Donnie, do we have any questions from Discord?
That's a good question.
As Ian sort of ponders this, because I feel like we ignore the Discord.
Yeah, it's there's this video I want to do about the future of transistor technology. I mean, we've gone from planar to FinFET. Everybody knows what FinFET is. We're talking about gate-all-around as the next generation of how you design your transistors. The industry itself is already doing research on the next three after that, after gate-all-around. Now, gate-all-around is more complex than there are more degrees of freedom for FinFET. It's amazing what you can do with gate-all-around. But then beyond gate-all-around, you've got things like fork sheet transistors. You've got complementary FETs. You've got complementary FETs where you've got FinFET and gate-all-around, or gate-all-around and FinFET. And then beyond that, you've got another factor of 2D transistors, which are dealing with individual monolayers. And I'm going to research conferences, and this is actually a good time because December through to February is usually good for these conferences, where these research companies, all the European companies I was talking about, for example, they're all doing the research towards this sort of technology to define the next 20 years of transistor technology, right? It's already being thought about. So yeah, and there's still lots of room to grow. It's people saying Moore's law is dead. Again, depends how you define Moore's law, whether you define it as a function of density, the 2D density versus 3D density, or cost. I have more process nodes up here for a reason, right? Things are going to get interesting with the way. So take, for example, complementary FETs or CFETs. The whole idea is that you have one row of transistors and then another row of transistors on top. And then that's your NMOS and PMOS, which creates your transistor. But just think of it as, stacking. Imagine just stacking two FinFETs on top of each other, right? You build them from the bottom layer up, right? So you deposit your whatever you need, then you put your mask on and photoresist, and then you deposit your metal and etch and all that photolithography,
all the cool stuff,
right? And then say you bake it at 800 degrees, right? And that's what bakes it in. Now you've got to create a second layer on top. If any of those processes above need more than 800 degrees, you screw up the bottom transistor you've already made. So now you have to create a technology for your top transistor that is lower temperature than the technology you created your bottom transistor. And that in itself is a level of innovation that needs to be developed.
Which makes the process even more complicated, have even more steps, and make this an even more expensive process to manufacture. So it continues.
If that's what requires to move the industry forward in terms of Moore's law or Moore's law equivalents, then sure, that's what we have to do. The other factor I think is interesting is you may have heard that one of the issues in the supply chain shortage is high performance films used in packaging. There's one called Ajinomoto build-up film that's used for redistribution layers, for example. Now, the supply of that is really limited, and to the point where the manufacturers of it are saying that their order books are filled through to 2025.
Mm-hmm.
That's even with all the growth they have planned, they could still sell another 30% more than what they're planning to make because they can't build out fast enough. TSMC is now developing processes that reduce the need for that film to be used, so it no longer becomes a supply chain issue in the future. So imagine you're in that industry, you make this film, you're having the best years that you've ever had because demand is skyrocketed and you're expanding, you're producing all you make. But the biggest, partner you have in manufacturing, TSMC, is suddenly trying to build you out of their process. What do?
Yeah.
Do you slow down production because that's how you optimize? Who knows? It's lots of interesting things happening on that level of the industry that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. But if you're that way inclined into learning about the engineering, it's lots of interesting stuff going on that I could talk about for ages. It's part of what I want to do on my channel is I want to go through these research papers, right? Talk people through them, help understand them. If you guys watch any of the legal professional videos on YouTube, they go through legal documents and helps you go through. The one I watch is Leonard French, Lawful Masses. I'm even part of his Patreon these days. But I can't do that with research papers because research papers are copyrighted. Unless I need to figure out exactly which are and which aren't and which I can have permissions to show on my channel because I really want to go down that route of how do you distill this really complex technology into something that everybody can understand? And I think, with a couple of things I've just said to you there, with the right lead in, they're fairly easy to understand where they're going, at least on a superficial level that if you wanted to know more, you could go out and do some research on it. I think there's a lot of wealth of information there. And I think there's, contrary to what we were saying at the top of the show, Kyle saying that nobody wants to hear this information anymore. I
think in terms of the pool of people that are involved, we're a smaller percentage of that pool than it used to be, but the market has grown exponentially for people who buy graphics cards. So
the demand for engineers is at an all-time high.
And here's sort of a question from that complicated one to one of the ones in the chat here, which is probably a simple one. When do you guys expect to see a 32 core consumer CPU?
Well, we already have them. If you're talking high-end desktop, Threadripper serves that function.
Yeah,
if you mean mainstream segment, I suppose it's possible that that we see that with Zen 4 or Zen 5 sort of. But I don't think it's likely.
I don't think it's necessary. As silly as that sounds, because consumer workloads are not anywhere near a place where 16 is even scratching the surface for 99% of consumer users that are even buying them.
Doesn't matter.
That's true.
It doesn't matter. There would be people who use it. Would I be controversial in saying that Intel might be the first one to a 32-core consumer, if we include efficiency cores?
That would be cool, honestly. That would be very cool to see something like that.
The thing that AMD has a problem with, and I've done a video on this, is how they expand the number of cores inside the chiplet. Because right now, the 8-core complexes that they're using are using rings or a bisected ring, and those only scale so far. And the only way to increase it is they've got a variety of ways they can increase it, but they haven't shown any tendency to do any yet. And Zen 4 won't change that. We're going to have to wait till Zen 5, which again is one of these another fresh paper redesigns. Whereas Intel, they've still got the ring, but they're doing, they've got these 4 cores inside one of those ring stops. So you end up with like a ring inside a ring, right? Which is what an EPIC, which is what an EPIC is as well. EPIC is a ring of rings because each 8 core is a ring, and then you've got the ring in the IO die. So I've got a feeling Intel would push more efficiency cores to go to 32 cores first over AMD. AMD has still yet to show the hybrid CPU design. And I think that won't, if they are going to go down that route, it won't be until 2024 with Zen 5 at the earliest, if not Zen 6. And that's because they're kind of half showing their hand, because the whole Bergamo with Zen 4C on Enterprise, that's essentially their little core equivalent. So,
right.
And that's what it's going to be like in the future. So,
we did have a question from the Discord. I'm going to throw it in the chat so I can bring it up on the screen. But there have before been talk about regulating the power draw on consumer hardware from the EU. With recent years where it seems like high-end hardware's energy consumption increased a lot, do you guys think that talk will come back? That was from Keist Kennegaard, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, on our Door TV Discord. I guess my pretty much short answer to that is, will the talk of it come back? Yes, but it'll probably just be more talk. Like, there's always regulators want to talk about, increased regulation for one particular political goal or another. Probably, let's reduce power consumption to help with, something like global warming or whatnot. But I mean, even if those regulations happen, it'll just be one more piece of red tape and not really any effective change to the consumer end, at least, because companies don't want to actually have to redesign the way they do products, so they will influence whatever regulation they have to.
Somebody says that we should start dancing or something, so I guess that's what we're going to do here.
I mean, with the power thing, we've kind of got into an era now where our CPUs that we run in our main systems, at least on a consumer level, have gone up from 95 watts to 220, right? If we could just consider Intel's Turbo. And then if you want to go high-end desktop, then you can go all the way up to 280. I don't think there's much more headroom in that. For a consumer system, or even for a high-end desktop system, right? You could argue, because it's easier for a PCIe device to go up to 500 watts than it is for a socketed CPU on a motherboard to go up to 500 watts. And that's just a factor of cooling. Now, could I see the EU develop some sort of way of measuring compute efficiency? Yes. However, that level of compute efficiency would also have to factor in 14 nanometer, 28 nanometer, 40 nanometer. I mean, the MCU that powers your car motor might not be efficient enough if we're going to have the same regulations for those chips as we would do leading edge in PCs. If anything, there will be a server, CPU, GPU, accelerator efficiency goal. And the EU is already creating its CPU in that field. It's by a company called Cyperl, RIA, using ARM and 6 nanometer. And I think there was an announcement about it the other week or within the last month that they're partnering with somebody else on something. But that's all to go down the European processor initiative. So the only way we start talking about regulation on computer equipment like that would be in light of what the European processor initiative is doing itself. So, and it would come to servers first because server power consumption and data center power consumption is arguably a bigger problem than consumer.
And I mean, it goes without saying, any regulation like that would also have to be duplicated by other countries, such as, if the EU does it, the US pretty much has to do it too, vice versa. Otherwise, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
And they don't
No.
have to. You could just have specialized products for the EU.
Yep.
That totally happens. That totally happens in a lot of different places.
And people smuggling across the border. You don't want to go to prison just because you've got a Ryzen 9 in your back pocket, do you?
So, one of the questions I had for you, Ian, is, and this wasn't listed, so this is a little scary.
7.
Oh no. No. So with Alder Lake, is there a reason that Intel has no E-cores on some of the lower end models? Because I feel like they'd be even more beneficial on, say, the 6 or quad cores.
Die area, relating to yield, relating to cost, relating to margins, everything. Core i5 is kind of their highest sales part. So as long as they have the high performance in those cores, that's what they're going to be judged on at the commercial level.
Mm-hmm.
Both Intel and AMD are focusing quite heavily on the commercial market right now, because that's where a lot of sales are going. And yeah, it's based on the Intel 7, 10 nanometer enhanced superfin process. What we hear, we still don't think yields are great. We still think costs are quite high. That's why I keep saying they're going to drop it the first chance they get. Yeah, it's just a play. I think it's a play that they have to make millions of chips for the market overall, and the best way to keep their costs down was just to take them out.
Okay.
To reduce die size. And yeah, you could argue for that market, does it really matter in the same way for high performance? So
I suppose that's fair. I just think that it would be really interesting to see certain products at that point. I was wondering whether or not it was really a segmentation thing or just an efficiency thing. It's
a segmentation price thing. I mean,
okay.
If you want to see how something like that would perform, that's what 12900 HK is for.
Sure.
So, I mean, I guess you kind of already covered this, but how do you see computing changing in the next 5 to 10 years?
It won't.
Okay.
Demand for... When I speak to companies, it's all about how do they bring high-performance AI compute, especially training, whether it's parameter sets. That's why we have companies like Cerebrus, companies like TensTorrent, companies like Grok, Sambanova, all developing specialized silicon. And we're in a golden age for creating customized silicon specifically for AI compute. Everybody's got a million ideas. The market is evolving so rapidly that's where all the innovation is right now in chip design. If you're speaking mostly about the consumer side, Intel's ultimate goal, is that you essentially have 20 tiles on your consumer desktop CPU, all connected via some form of interconnect, whether that's EMIB or something else. And you can essentially pick and choose which ones are cores, which ones are graphics, which ones are I/O, which ones are... So basically, each IP block becomes its own silicon chiplet. Now, the economics of it mean that if you have chiplets smaller than, say, 50 square millimeters, then it gets a bit tricky. So you're not going to get 20 of those in a desktop CPU. So it's... And then at the end of the day, even if we got this level of customization, 20 different IP blocks that you could choose from, mix and match, how many you have on a product, Intel or any other company in the same position would just turn around and say, well, we think these 3 configurations are going to be our best sellers, so we're just going to sell those 3 anyway, which is what we get with monolithic. So
It doesn't really make that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make that much of a difference in the end if it goes that way.
I mean, we're moving into an era in the enterprise side where we have PCIe Gen 5, we've got CXL, we've got C6, and we've got Gen Z also folded into CXL, where all these different connectivities, even if you add in on top of that things like NVLink and some of the other proprietary ones, you could have mindgasms about different ways you can connect them, right? Because it's like Lego. Once you're involved in standards, everything becomes Lego, and you could think of the most insane things to build. Same with motherboards back in the day. They used to be, you could think of insane things to do, and ASRock did a lot of them. But at the end of the day, people just build what they sell. I mean,
Donnie, show them the shirt.
It's showed enough for this evening.
I posted on Twitter a couple of days ago that it's the standards that are moving the industry forward. Really, it's and John Masters is also a big proponent on this. It's basically keep chips boring because it allows you to have standards, which means that you can have fun, which makes them interesting. So keep chips boring to keep chips interesting.
So getting closer to some of the end of my questions, and I'll start taking a look at some of the questions in here in the chat. But
actually, before we get any further than that, I just want to we're about 2 hours and 30 minutes in. Ian, do you have time for some more questions?
A couple more, yeah.
Okay.
All right, I guess we can kind of rapid fire these ones. How much longer do you think silicon will be used in cutting edge chips, and is graphene likely the next step? Because I've been hearing about graphene for more than 10 years now, and I feel like this is a question I always ask you, but it's sort of worth reiterating. Silicon
will be used for another 50 years. The next stage. Gate-all-around already uses silicon germanium, right? That's already involved. We're already using elements like cobalt and ruthenium in wires. That's already been used. The next fundamental materials change will be 2G transistors, and that's molybdenum disulfide, bisulfide, MOS2. That's the biggest. That's the most appealing candidate right now in that area of research. And TSMC even did a paper last year which was using these 2D transistors, and they were using bismuth connects in order to enable electron transfer. Now, bismuth is a weird element at times, but it's still built on a silicon base, right? So, yeah, silicon is here to stay. Exactly what the transistors will be made out of. The next stage, I think, where we actually get a fundamental change rather than an alloy, will be 2D transistors.
Okay. And this is the final one I have, which is: do you see the U.S. doing anything to try to shore up demand domestically for things like NAND and the RAM supply?
Well, Micron has its fab, doesn't it? They have the Leti fab. They also have a couple more inside the US. In terms of CHIPS Act funding, memory based, Micron's going to get that. So, yeah, if they're going to pile any money into that side of the business, it's going to be Micron based.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for me. Do you have any questions, Donnie, or is there any that was in the Discord?
None in the Discord. There's lots of questions in the chat. I see one from NBW Doughboy said, how does the ARM acquisition failure hurt NVIDIA long term? Battling against AMD and Intel. Could NVIDIA lose if AMD and Intel keep CPU and GPU in household package?
No. The whole NVIDIA buying ARM thing, I think, was a bit weird anyway for me. There's still going to be premium license holders. There's still going to be architect license holders. The only thing it stops them doing is arguably moving the direction in which the CPUs would be developed in the sort of 7-year time frame. It's yeah, I don't think it changes much, to be honest.
I mean, if NVIDIA wanted to release ARM products that compete with x86 in some form or another, which I think is what this comment is getting at, they could do that now. They already do that in some
Yeah.
form or another
Mhm.
already. So there's no...
Yeah,
They don't need to own ARM in order to use ARM as the basis for their CPU and GPU combination thing.
I mean,
if they want
what's
to.
Grace? Grace,
Yeah,
the whole thing
exactly.
behind Grace, right, is CPU GPU connectivity using an ARM backbone. So
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going in the direction where we're going to see more ARM, powered computers, one way or the other. I mean, with Apple's already doing it on their whole product stack, so there's going to be more Microsoft Windows-based machines using ARM at some point. If those are also gaming machines, then so be it. And NVIDIA doesn't even need to be the one producing the CPU.
So on the whole ARM running Windows thing, we know about Windows on Snapdragon. I did a recent interview with Alex Katuzian from Qualcomm. He's the head of their consumer division. That's a good interview. We even talk about Qualcomm getting into discrete graphics, so that's fun. He said that their GPUs would be gold, but they currently don't have a product. I've also got an interview with Miguel Nunez, who's in charge of their ACPC division. They're essentially their Windows on Snapdragon division. That's not live yet. That should be coming out next week. But yeah, he talks more about the Nuvia thing because so I speak too much about Nuvia and Qualcomm these days.
So I'm going to have one last question. That's going to be more of a supply chain sort of geopolitical reasoning for the stuff here. But if you could actually bring that comment back up, Donny, the one from NBW Doughboy, another one. Let me find it. Here, how important will CPU performance be to gaming in the future with games becoming more GPU bound and CPUs already pushing 200 FPS plus in competitive games? Will it matter that much from here on?
Did you not see the announcement of the 500 hertz monitor?
I was going to bring that up.
Week.
Yeah, it's the thing people miss is that when your PC calculates a frame, it also calculates your mouse position, right? So if you're doing a wide arc, right, if you're doing 200 frames a second, it means it's detecting your mouse position 200 times,
and it's doing it this many times. Yeah,
even if you're only displaying it on a 60 hertz monitor, right? So if you've got a graphics card that can do 1000 FPS, but you're only playing on, say, a 144 hertz monitor, it's still updating your mouse 1,000 times a second, assuming the polling rate of USB can keep up as well. So there's always that
to
aspect
like 2000 hertz gaming mice, by the way.
Yeah, that's the mice, but what about the port?
Yeah,
that's the critical part of the chain, right?
Critical part, yeah.
So some motherboards are now advertising the 1000 hertz, polling rate on some of them.
ASRock used to advertise gaming mouse, and it was like an individual separate driver that they put in. Use PS2 mice, just solve it all. It's interrupt based, it's not polling based. Come on. So there will. The argument here is, at some point, you have enough computing power to do certain things, like for answering your email and for doing Zoom. We're already there. It's a very binary yes/no, that whether we're over that bar or not. Whereas when it comes to gaming, it's not binary. It's like a sigmoid function. It's
ever moving goalposts.
Yeah,
and it depends on the use case. See, for a lot of people, I know a lot of people in our chat have said, I'm fine at 60 hertz. I want 4K. I want 1080p. I want low graphics. So it really depends on what you're doing. So like, do you really need a 500 hertz panel or 1000 FPS if you're playing Civ? No. But if you're really, really good at Counter-Strike or Rainbow Six or whatever, this is when you really want or would appreciate or would get something out of really high refresh rate monitors.
Or even VR. Right?
Yeah.
It's so I've never owned a monitor that's done more than 60 hertz.
Really?
Right. So for my testing, I have 4K monitors, and I don't care if they're 1 hertz, as long as they put 4K to the display and it's rendering.
You click your runs and it works.
Yeah, do my benchmarks and it works. The 2 monitors I use for my desk over there are they're actually Huawei 27-inch Mate views. They do 35. They're 3x2 monitors, so they do 3840 by 2560, and there's 2 of them. So, but they're still 60 hertz.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny watching games that can do 3x2, but there's no game I've managed that will actually go across both monitors yet, because they don't do a 3-to-1 aspect ratio. But yeah, it's if I wanted to do that at 200 FPS, what exactly would I need? A 6090. I've got a 6850 somewhere. Maybe that'll work.
Well, I mean, again, it depends on what you're trying to do. A lot of competitive gamers that I know play at medium to low settings, or certain things are turned off because it makes the shadows pop, and they don't really need the highest end graphics card out there to push 300 FPS. What they really need is a CPU that can get those frame rates when something blows up, and the physics calculation has to happen.
But what portion of the market are they? And then we get into that argument again. So,
well, I mean, again, there's not going to be that many people buying 500 hertz panels, so they don't need to sell to everybody.
And even then, if you take performance out of the equation, efficiency, I would much rather get 60 FPS at 2 watts than at 200.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really depends on how much people care about those other things. So that's kind of where this whole conversation goes.
I'd rather be mining at 2 watts than 200 watts.
Many such cases. But yeah, I mean, the other question that I wanted to ask, since it seems like we pretty much covered that one, is this one. Do you see, a lot of people seem to see these sort of announcements about Intel opening fabs and the CHIPS Act to be sort of like an immediate thing, which it's really not. It's more of a, I think 2020 really woke a lot of people's eyes up, especially legislative type people, to how critical our infrastructure is that we don't have control over anymore, at least in the US.
And how many senators voted against the infrastructure bill? Sorry, political. Oh, right.
And then we sort of have the
different
other
infrastructure.
And then we sort of have the issue of the fact that there is a place in the world where something like 80% of our silicon is manufactured, or 80% of the leading edge is manufactured, that is questionable.
Yeah, that's the number that Pat Gelsinger put out. Yeah.
How long they're going to be a sovereign nation. And, there's a lot of people who are saying it'll never happen. It could happen. The fact that it's even a question in something that's really mission critical for, I mean, everything from toasters to, your stoplights, is sort of a thing that scares a lot of people. And I think that's why we're going to see a lot of this movement. How much of that do you think would be able to be offshored away from Taiwan in the next 10 years?
Are we assuming TSMC continues to grow or is static?
Continues to grow.
We're going to assume that they're continuing to grow, but they even offered to move plants here. How much
that was
going to offer is a whole other thing, and how much of it is just
they didn't offer to move, they offered to build new.
That's a different thing.
I would say exactly the same proportion. If it's 20% now, in 10 years it'll still be 20%, because TSMC make right now 14 million wafers a year,
which is an extreme amount if you think about it.
2 million of those are leading edge, whereas Intel, I think worldwide, does about 2.5 million, and pretty much all of that is leading edge. So Intel, the new build in Ohio, that's being built in an area which has zero infrastructure for semis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, the companies involved are going to do site relocation, and you're going to have those companies springing up and training people, and that's already starting to happen because they know the business is going to be there, that sort of thing. Or Intel's already putting the contract in place. But yeah, that's going to be a longer than normal fab build out because there's no infrastructure. Whereas if you built in Arizona or Austin, the infrastructure is already there.
Mm-hmm.
So, or was it Round Rock or whatever it is? And Samsung's already announced out there as well, in the northeast Austin area. But at the same time, TSMC is also announcing plenty of, $100 billion in the next 3 years of, build out in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
So, the only way I see the US moving more than 20-25% production
Mm-hmm.
to domestic is if Taiwan got wiped off the map. And I don't think that would happen.
I personally don't think it would happen because I don't know if China really sees a value in salted earth and the kind of, that's kind of the issue here I personally have is I think there would be too much of a cost, and the cost of rebuilding a city and especially a high-tech one like that.
No, it's not even that. It's not even that. It's the minute China launches an attack, every country not in China's pocket would instantly put the brakes on everything to do financial, and it would devalue their currency. They'll go through hyperinflation, and even if China was willing to sacrifice half of its populace in order to do it, then what have they gained at the end of the day? No, they've been set back another 20-50 years, arguably. The problem I think there is that to a certain extent, some of what the US is doing with the entity list is pushing China down that route.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, take a look at Huawei. Okay, Huawei on the entity list, can't buy chips from TSMC. Smartphone division is essentially created. But what have they done instead? They had lots and lots and lots of cash reserves. They've tried to build up a software ecosystem. They've built up an IoT ecosystem. They've built out the whole thing is 1 + 8 + N. 1 being your smartphone, 8 being the 8 main appliances around your smartphone, like your TV, like your PC, and then N is everything IoT. So the whole point is they have a software ecosystem for all of that, and none of that needs leading edge.
Mm-hmm.
So now you've just pivoted a company to arguably be a bigger threat. So it's If Huawei weren't on the entity list, they wouldn't have their software ecosystem in such a strong position today. But they might still be selling a few smartphones
and trade secrets.
Yeah. There's that side. Obviously, this is very simplifying, and there's a lot of nuance, and some people may find. I know whenever I talk about Huawei, people get annoyed because it's like, why are you even giving airtime to a company in the pocket of the Chinese state? And it's like, because they matter on the world stage.
Yeah,
and
you can't.
Whenever I speak to Wall Street, they're asking, what's up with Huawei? What sort of effect will they have on the businesses that I'm investing in?
You can't look at it that way from an analyst's perspective. There can't be this company's Voldemort. We can't talk about them because they do shady things or whatever. Every company is important to some degree. They all have a place, and we need to be aware of it at the very least.
Hypersonic Monkey Brain says that if Russia does attack Ukraine, think of the precedent would set for China to attack Taiwan. Well, here's the issue. This is a completely different issue.
We can get really in the weeds about geopolitical war games, but that's not really
Just a really short thing is...
it's not really the expertise of anybody here on the panel.
Russia's...
But aren't you pivoting the channel?
Yeah. They're trying to take a bunch of flatland. They're not trying to take. Is apparently what the idea is that they're trying to take a lot of flatland. Trying to take Taiwan as a mainland city, it would cost way too much money to rebuild the city after you have to attack it. It's just that's the problem, and then you have to lose all the material and the people. War is very expensive in the modern age.
I mean, to be honest, even if China did attack Taiwan, I don't think it would be for the technical. I think it would just be for physical location.
Mm-hmm.
And anything technical would be a plus.
Mm-hmm.
But you can imagine that if there might be plans in place that if it got that far, then it would all be scorched.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, the Taiwan Relations Act in the US, which is, not the abstract notion of a full promise to defend, but, they sold $5 billion worth of weapons to Taiwan last year. And
mm-hmm.
even though China probably built 500 billion worth of.
Mm-hmm.
And the Taiwan is an hour away by a plane, by a commercial airline from the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are going to be boats coming, or even say an ICBM, it'd be picked up.
Mm-hmm. I don't think the win condition is really there for them. In exactly what you said, there'd be too much risk that you'd be putting up in the air for something that you'll probably end up getting if you just play the long game.
Yeah, but the long game may be centuries.
They look at things very differently than the way that we do, and they've said as much.
Where are my chips now? Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's pretty much it. I think that's probably the best place that we can end it. I really don't think there's any pivot points from here.
You want to end it on China attacking Taiwan? Because, man. All right. Well, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Adored Tech, where we talk geopolitical nonsense. Thanks, Ian, for coming on this week. It was a pleasure to speak to you. And we're going to call it there. Have a good one, guys.
Good luck with the channel, guys.
Thanks.
Looking forward to it.